that public bodies conduct its meetings at a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing remotely, and it is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov at City Council TV or on Xfinity 8 RCN 82 files 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. If you wish to provide public testimony and have not signed up to do so, please email Christine O'Donnell at christine.o'donnell@boston.gov. I believe we have one person currently signed up for public testimony. For those giving public testimony, please make sure that your name is visible so that I may call on you. Members of the public will be promoted to panelists when your name is called. Please make sure that you click yes when prompted to join as a panelist. This afternoon, I'm joined by my council colleagues, Councilor Erin Murphy, Councilor Michael Flaherty, Councilor Ruth C. Louis Jen, Councilor Kenzie Bach, and it looks like we have another addition, Councilor Frank Baker. This home rule petition was sponsored by Mayor Wu and was transmitted along with the docket number 0324, an order temporarily extending urban renewal until March 31st, 2025, or passage of a proposed relevant home rule petition. This home rule petition formally abolishes the Boston Redevelopment Authority, or BRA, and the Economic Development and Industrial Corporation of Boston. This act transfers the powers and duties of those entities to an agency newly created by this act and formally adopts this agency as the Boston Planning and Development Agency, or BPDA. This act also ends the period of urban renewal and narrows the scope of the newly formed BPDA to focus on three key planning principles. One, resilience, including climate change mitigation and adaptation. Two, affordability, including the creation and retention of affordable housing in support of local businesses. And three, equity, in the form of community development plans that ensure the equitable distribution of benefits derived from development in the city and redress the historical and equitable policies that may have led to the inequities in the city's growth. This hearing is an opportunity for councilors to hear from the administration on the impact of the act, as well as listen to public testimony. As chair, I will now hand it over to my council colleagues in order of arrival for opening remarks if they have any, and then we will hand it over to the administration for their presentation, which I'm told they have. In order of arrival, we're going to start with Councilor Erin Murphy, followed by Councilor Michael Flaherty.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here, panelists. Lots of questions. Happy to be here and listen to your information you're going to share with us today. Questions around finances and how much this is going to cost the city is something I hope that will come up through this hearing today. Some estimates are suggesting it could cost us as much as over $60 million to transfer from an independent agency into the city of Boston. So hope that is part of your presentation today. I know many employees are concerned. So that is one of the big things I'm hoping to hear, and just getting an understanding of what benefits will we get and how will this be more a transparent agency that is, working in a better way if it's not independent anymore. Like, will we have different departments that are the same, like the BHA, Boston Water and Sewer? Like, why is this better is something I hope I have a better understanding coming out of this hearing today. So thank you, Chair. I look forward to this hearing.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flaherty.
I think you had to step away, Mr. Chair.
All right, fantastic. Councilor Louis Jen, followed by Councilor Bach.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to folks and members of the BPDA for being here as we embark on an important discussion that residents are always bringing up to us that I have questions about. We really do as a city need to change how we plan and develop, and bringing the BPDA into as a new city department, while a change, we need to make sure that it's actually a material change that will also change what the leadership and accountability and transparency has looked like at the BPDA. Just according to the preamble of this home rule petition, it looks like the administration is looking not only to bring the BPDA under city oversight, but also strengthen public participation requirements and embed principles of affordability, climate resiliency, and equity into development processes. I know that we as councilors often hear from constituents and residents about the myriad of problems with public participation. So strengthening what public participation looks like is important. But hoping that we in this hearing can get to the meat of what it would look like to really see a process that centers affordability, resiliency, and equity, because it sounds good. And I know it may sound good to residents, but we want to make sure that it's actually going to lead to a material change into how things are being done at the BPDA, and to make sure that residents who often feel like they're being railroaded by developers feel like they have a fair voice in this process. And we all know that there's a lot happening with this. With the recent executive order, which wasn't a law or an ordinance that the BPDA board didn't sign, and this home rule petition that Beacon Hill has to sign, and that, you know, we as a city council, our role in any sort of reorganization of departments and agencies. So there are a lot of moving pieces here that I want the public to be aware of, that I want us all to really digest, because if implemented, these proposed changes could really have a transformative effect on long-term fractured neighborhoods here in the city of Boston, which is much needed as we're thinking about the further wealth cleavages that exist in our city. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion, and I look forward to asking you the questions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see Councillor Flaherty is back with us. If you don't mind, Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be obviously brief. I got the longest history probably of anyone on this call with the BRA, doing business as the BPDA. They play a very important, vital function, creation of housing and economic development in our city, and not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think needs a sort of a whole-scale overhaul, maybe some tweaks here and there. They possess some very important critical powers that are created by state legislature, and recognizing the strengths of those and the importance of those and the role that it's played in moving our city forward. And I'd be remiss if we don't recognize all the hard, dedicated employees of the BRA doing business as the BPDA. And then the role that whether they're going to be BRA employees or City of Boston employees, what does that mean for retirement purposes? So there's a lot of issues that on a personal level I want to iron out for those good, hardworking, dedicated planners and staff that frankly don't know where they stand, don't know where their retirement stands, don't know whether they're a super or salad, are they a BRA employee, are they a City of Boston employee, what does that mean for retirement, et cetera. So a lot of moving parts here, and as I said from the onset, BRA doing business as the BPDA as well as the EDIC. There's questions now as to who now will oversee the Ray Flynn Marine Industrial Park, what are the moving parts down here, who will pay who and what rent, and who's receiving, and where are those revenues going to go now? Are those going to go to a separate escrow account that continues to guide and monitor development and pay for those assets, or is it going to go into the general fund? So it's not as easy as just saying, hey, well, let's scrap the BRA, or let's make these major changes. There's a lot of items that are attached to that. So again, don't think the BRA doing business as the BPDA is perfect, but I'd prefer to see some minor tweaks as opposed to wholesale changes that are going to uproot and cause a lot of angst and anxiety, not only with existing employees, but developers. We have a responsibility to those that want to make a commitment, invest in our city, that the rules of the game are fairly applied to everybody, and that there's a degree of predictability. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now as these changes are taking place, coupled with inflation, construction costs, insurance, fuel, maintenance, repair, environmental requirements and standards. So a lot of moving parts here that potentially could discourage investment. And Boston's in a great position. We boast the best colleges, universities, hospitals, network of community health centers, financial services, labs, all the things that, in addition to championship sports teams, all the things that give us some added mojo. And it's why we're not like a lot of cities our size, bigger or smaller, that struggle through down economic terms in times. So we've always been well poised as a city. I just want to make sure that we don't screw that up. So with that, look forward to hearing to those that are in positions to make these decisions. But I really need to be convinced that we need wholesale changes, and we need to tip the BPDA upside down on their head, along with the BRA board and the zoning commission. Everyone's sitting there scratching their head trying to figure out what's going on and why is this happening. So obviously today's the day, Mr. Chairman, to see where the devil in the details are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bach, followed by Councillor Baker, followed by Councillor Braden. So Councillor Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the BPDA folks for being with us, Director Jemison and Devin, I see on the screen. And I'm sorry, General Counsel Lisa Harrington. I'm excited to be having this hearing today. I think that the way that I feel about these issues is really that it is both obvious that it doesn't make sense for Boston to have tools that are framed in state legislation as being about dealing with blighted neighborhoods and kind of using that old frame of urban renewal, which we know has done so much harm to our communities, and the awkwardness and more than awkwardness of that being kind of the framework of the legal tools, I think is a real, it's a problem for trust building in our communities. And it's also just a problem for the suitability of those tools in today's Boston, which is anything but blighted. At the same time, I think that it is so important for the challenges that we face today, especially things like climate mitigation, where you may have to assemble some border that can get flooded so that the buildings don't get flooded. Or when we talk about affordability, the opportunity to do housing on public land, especially if there is going to be a private nonprofit partner involved in that, is actually much better suited to the BPDA's powers than the way that eminent domain and such works for the city, where everything has to be an all public facility. So it just feels to me like there's a couple of areas. I mean, and then you think about, from an equity perspective, a building like China Trade, where we've really aimed to have communities serving below market leases and be able to kind of encode those equity goals into what we're doing. So for me, the kind of shift that is being contemplated here in the legislation, where we get to move the agency away from those old frameworks and the frameworks that have done a lot of harm, while also preserving these critical tools for kind of a muscular public interest in the 21st century, it's really got to be the goal. And so to me, I would say I'm broadly encouraged by the direction of the legislation. I think that it's the right kind of idea, and I don't think it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But that'll be kind of the headspace that I'm coming from here, is really making sure that we've got the kind of city that, tools that can lead with the public interest, affordability, climate resiliency, and equity in mind. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Baker, followed by Councillor Braden. Mr. Baker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would echo the sentiment of what Councillor Flaherty was speaking about. A lot of questions around money. Who's going to be able to now accept mitigation and linkage money? Who now is going to be able to disperse those monies? What happens with the employees? Kind of thinking along the lines of what the board said the other night, and we need details. What does this look like? And as far as transparency is concerned, I lived through Menino. No phone calls back from the BRA at all. Wouldn't even answer a question as a city councilor. To forward to what happened under the Walsh administration, where I was involved as much as I wanted to be in all the development that happened in my district, from Glover's Corner, from Accordia, and all those places like that. And I found the outsized voice of the advocate type coming in, and the downsides of my voice in the last, my voice being an elected voice. I don't know if that happened across the board, but I'm concerned about, to use Kenzie's term, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and more in line with what Flaherty might have to say. Are there tweaks we should be looking at to do? Absolutely, definitely. Do we need to totally change everything just to change everything because of a campaign promise? Not really sure. But thank you for being here today, and hopefully we'll have some of these questions answered. And sorry, I should have said good morning to everybody. Well, good afternoon. It's 2:00. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm gonna come off the camera when I'm not speaking, if that's okay with you guys. So thank you for your participation today, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and obviously feel free to do with the camera as you feel you need to do. Councillor Braden, if you have an opening or any statements you'd like to make.
Thank you. I'm very glad that we're having this hearing, this conversation about this home rule petition. This is not the first time we've talked about abolishing the BRA. It is we've looked back at some of the history. It's about the 10th home rule petition since at least the creation of the BRA, and most recently up until the early 2000s, there's been a conversation about abolishing the BRA. So this is not a new idea. One of the things that drives my concern or my interest in having some reform of the BRA is, a sense of frustration with the level of planning citywide, but also at the neighbourhood level, to ensure that we have the infrastructure of transit and affordable housing and access to healthcare and access to food and all of that. The details of planning, not just in terms of height and density and stuff, but also all the nuts and bolts of what makes a living community that's sustainable and equitable over the long term. So, I really look forward to the conversation. One question, I'm in the car, so I'll be in and out this afternoon. One question really is that hasn't been, I'd like more clarity on, is what will happen to the urban renewal era powers and responsibilities of the BRA relative to its relationship with public housing and with the BHA, as well as with the Public Facilities Commission and the construction and maintenance of city capital infrastructure and all of those nuts and bolts. I really feel like I have a surface understanding of the BRA's role and all the different tentacles that it has. So I really look forward to sort of looking under the bonnet and getting a better understanding of what works and what doesn't work, and then focusing in on the bits that need fixing. So that's all I have for now, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Lara, do you have an opening statement or anything you'd like to say? You're muted.
Me?
Councillor Lara, you're up if you have any opening statement you'd like to say.
No, so sorry. For some reason, when you called on my name, it cut out, so I didn't necessarily hear you. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Chair, for making sure that this hearing happened as soon as possible. I, have had the pleasure of engaging with all 79 pages of Mayor Wu's white paper on this transition, and so I am excited that some of these changes are happening. I have questions as we move forward through this process, but I do think that this transformation and this transition is really going to make it easier and faster for us to build and preserve affordable housing. And as the housing chair, it's something that's incredibly important to me. And as the environmental justice chair, making sure that we're centering resiliency, which it does here, is also something that I'm really interested in. So I will reserve my questions for my turn, but I have no further comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And as is custom, I will just say my opening statement, and then we'll go into the administration. I can tell you all that I actually, when I first came in as a new councillor in 2019, 2020, I first looked into our master plan scenario, because the way that we do sort of our development in the city is piece by piece, not so much by neighborhood as a whole or by streets as a whole, but by project individually. And I thought there had to be a better way to do that. So I had my staff looking up how other cities handled development in major cities. So they have official master plans. There's different plans. So we were reaching out to councilors and lawmakers in Seattle and Minneapolis and San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, and just trying to figure out how development was working in these different cities. And basically what we found is that no one city has claimed to a development process that they are actually like enthusiastic supporters of. Every single city has essentially created their own version of a master plan or planning process or development process for their city that has unexpected challenges or expected challenges in the ways that things get instituted or done. And essentially some of them do certain things better than others. Some do better at how they create space for affordable housing. Some do better in how they have environmental lenses. Some do better in how they streamline the process as a whole. And I will just say that the other thing that I realized when we started to sort of take this outside of talking to other elected officials in other cities about their planning processes, and we took it to neighborhoods and stakeholders, is that you almost have to create a plan that nobody likes to create a fair process. Because essentially what we found was often developers and development would like you to sort of slant the process in a way that makes them have to sort of go around or avoid community process. And then community really wants a process that's heavily weighted in their favor, where they can essentially stop almost all development. And so creating a process that is fair to the city generally means creating a process in which both sides have equal stake in, that is streamlined, that is efficient, and that's not often popular. And what I will say is I am very aware that our process is less than ideal. One of the things that I get told all the time, and I'll leave it to the chief and others who've been here for much longer, is that the length of our process, all of the different things that you have to do to get through our development process actually is so expensive on the long term for developers that we're leaving affordable housing units that they otherwise could subsidize on the floor through that process, because they have to sort of bake those costs into the process itself. And so my goal is having a BPDA in a new image that is streamlined in such a way where we are getting rid of sort of wasted time and wasted sort of mechanics that are leading to sort of bottlenecks and chokeholds, and creating a process that is much more fair and focused on affordable housing, focusing on environmental impact, focusing on the city of today and less a city of yore. And so my hope is that this plan that's presented is explained here to the public and to my council colleagues. I am supportive of this. I just want to make sure that all of the questions that we have get answered during this session. And so with that, who we have today for that, Arthur Jemison, the Chief of Planning and the Director of the Boston Planning and Development Agency, is here today. Lisa Harrington is General Counsel for the Boston Planning and Development Agency. She is also here today. And Devin Quirk, who is the Deputy Chief for Development and Transportation for the Boston Planning and Development Agency. And I'm going to give you all the floor to present for however long your presentation is, whatever statements. If you have opening statements you'd like to make, please feel free to make them. And then we will go by order of arrival into questions from council colleagues. So take this time to present, to try to sort of get ahead of whatever answers you may have, to make a statement however you feel one way or the other, and then we can go right into it. So the floor is yours. You can, to the chief or to Devin, whoever is leading, however order you would like to take comment or period. I'll go to you, Arthur, Chief Jemison, and you can go to everybody on your team as appropriate. So the floor is yours.
Councilor and Chair, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and good afternoon to everyone, every one of the councilors, your staff, and all the listening public. We're pleased to be able to join you here today. As I know you've heard, we're going to be presenting on an act to improve and modernize planning and community development in Boston. And so I've appreciated the opening comments. It gives me a good chance to get a sense of how to begin this process correctly, but I'll start. I'm the Chief of Planning, a new position that the mayor asked me to adopt. I'm also the Director of the BPDA, and I'm joined by my General Counsel and my Deputy Chief. And so what I would like to do, if it's okay, is sort of start by talking a little bit of history, and then I want to talk a little about what this bill does not do and address, because I think we'll have a chance to get into great detail about it later, and then I'll sort of identify a few of the challenges that are in front of us. So if you go to the next slide, Devin, I'd appreciate it. So in 1957 and later in 1960, what was then the BRA was formed, a combination of acts of the council and acts of the General Court of Massachusetts, is how the agency was formed. I want to just provide a little bit of background because I've had a chance to work in other parts of the state, and I want to let you know that there's three actual things happening in the BRA, the agency that you all know well, that I want to make sure each of them is identified clearly, and we talk about which one of the three things is being changed. As you'll hear from Devin in his testimony in a minute, we have a planning board where projects are approved and deemed they're approved and allowed to go forward. We have a redevelopment authority or agency which has the right to implement, conduct has certain powers to act in the real estate market. Sometimes people call them urban renewal powers. They're not actually urban renewal powers explicitly, but they were given to these agencies so they could take advantage of a set of policies from the federal government called urban renewal. And the third thing is the staff that support those boards. So in our case here in Boston, the planning board that approves projects, the redevelopment authority that has the right to enter into concessionary tax agreements, et cetera, are together in one agency. That agency is the BRA, now acting as the BPDA. In a relatively unique situation for the Commonwealth, in Boston, the staff of the agency are also separate from the city and work for the board. In most of the other places in the Commonwealth where there's a planning board and a redevelopment authority, the staff who support that board, who submit the board memos that get approved by the board, are usually staff of the city that have oversight by the city council. So a unique thing about the BRA, now the BPDA, was that it was sort of a super agency that had the right to do undertake the approvals of projects and their adequacy. It had the right to use a set of powers when appropriately authorized, and had its own staff. That's one of the reasons that it's unique. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the charter, and while the charter might not seem like a big thing, especially as it affects one of those three things, the redevelopment authority aspect of the agency, it is important to highlight and talk about it. This slide shows the charter of the BRA when it was initially formed was to eliminate blight, decadence, and substandard housing. Now, a charter may not seem like a major thing, but the charter is what enables the agency to use the power of concessionary tax agreements, the power to buy land without procurement, the power to use eminent domain. It gives the agency the power to do that. The agency needed to make a finding, usually performed with pictures like the one you see on your left, saying that there's blight that exists and we need to take action against that blight. So as you can imagine, the Boston of 1957 and 1960 is very different from the Boston we have today, in part because of the work of the agency, and in other ways, the agency also set the city back in some ways, but it's a very different city. And so the charter is important because it says the circumstances through which the agency and the city can use these extraordinary powers. And yet when you make a finding and say you want to do it, it has to be because of these three things. Those three things probably sound to you and the listening public same way they sound to me and potentially others. They sound very reflective of the moment in Boston in 1960. If we want to continue to use the powers that the agency has been allocated by the General Court of Massachusetts, we need to update that charter so that it reflects the kinds of issues that we're going to be facing for the next 60 years. I think the people who conceived of blight, decadence, and substandard housing certainly had a forward-looking view, because those were the reasons we took land and entered into tax agreements for 60 years. With the aspiration to be as thoughtful, we're proposing that the three challenges that our city faces that would warrant the use of these extraordinary capacities would be to protect the city from the impacts of climate change and enable it to adapt to climate change so our city can continue to grow despite the changes in the environment, to maintain affordability in Boston. As we all know, affordability, both kind of deed-restricted housing and also the general supply of housing are two issues that concern most Bostonians. And finally, equity, those cases where there may be a reparative effect to address past wrongs are three things that should authorize our use of the unique capacities of the agency. So I think our feeling is that this part of the statute authorizing the agency in its redevelopment capacities needs to be updated. Now, before, and Devin's going to land on this himself a little bit later, I do want to highlight a couple of things that I don't want anyone to be confused about. So development is going to continue to be approved by the BPDA board. It is the planning board of Boston, and it will continue to approve development projects and determine their adequacy. That is not something that's going to change. It's not something that's proposed to change, certainly in this legislation. It's not something we intend to change. Second, assuming this legislation passes, Boston will still have the ability to enter into concessionary tax agreements. Will still have the ability to enter the private market as a buyer without using procurement law. Instead of doing those things because of blight, decadence, and substandard housing, we'll be able to do it for resilience, affordability, and equity. We're going to continue to do many of the things that Bostonians rely on to help them and help the development community make sure that development is good for the city. So I want to make sure, and Devin will land on this a little firmly in a little bit, that those things are going to continue to occur. And that today's conversation is about a slightly narrower version and a slightly narrower list of things, and is not the entirety of the administration's proposal for development or about the BPDA. If it's okay, I want to skip the next slide and go on to the challenges to ending urban renewal. So to get down into the weeds, one of the other things that this council has already acted on, and that we're asking the legislature to act on, is currently urban renewal is the reason why many thousands of affordable housing units are able to remain affordable, why many acres of Boston are able to stay open space, and why they're not threatened by the strength of the market to be turned into different things. So we recently asked this honorable body to take an action extending urban renewal so that the legislature could adjudicate our home rule proposal, hopefully, without having any of those units come under threat or any of that land come under threat. And we appreciate the council's support in those areas. But as I've highlighted, we also are saying to ourselves, there may be causes where the specific capacities that the current law allows us to use concessionary tax agreements and other things to do may be warranted and appropriate to address future challenges. And that's why we proposed the home rule, petition that you're reviewing and listening to today. With that, I'm going to ask Devin to walk through an explanation in detail of what the legislation would do and what it wouldn't do, and I'll come in at the end to close and open us up for questions. Devin?
Thank you, Arthur. For the record, I'm Devin Quirk, Deputy Chief here at the BPDA, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about what the home rule petition before you today actually says. I think we'll stay at a pretty high level because we want to get to your questions and start answering them and have a productive dialogue as quickly as possible. So to start, the act is called an Act to Improve and Modernize Planning and Community Development in the City of Boston. The first thing, maybe the most important thing that the act does is that it officially sunsets urban renewal in the City of Boston. It draws to a close that area of Boston's history, which has produced some elements of really important community good for the people of Boston. Also has a very checkered social justice legacy, including the displacement of thousands from the West End and in other places. So after 70 years of blight, decadence, and substandard housing being the guiding principles of urban renewal in the BPDA, this act officially draws that to a close. It does that by prohibiting the BPDA from taking further actions related to those urban renewal processes. That's the first thing, and perhaps the most signature thing. What this act also does is that it, in in terminating urban renewal and sunsetting it, it does it in a way that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as Councillor Bach and Councillor Flaherty said, and actually appropriately addresses the risks, those two major reasons why we've held on to urban renewal, those two problems that Arthur just mentioned around sunsetting urban renewal, the things that it protects, and the future actions it might empower. It protects previous restrictions by allowing the BPDA, by law, to enforce land disposition agreements and other restrictions that exist in Boston today that are tied to urban renewal plans in perpetuity. So those are those affordable housing units, those open space restrictions, those community use restrictions that Chief Jemison spoke to just a minute ago. Those would continue to be protected as the legislation is written in perpetuity, and we would not need to bring further requests for extensions of urban renewal plans for that purpose. So it would, I think, appropriately resolve that issue in the community's interest. The second thing it does is or the second issue it addresses is the future actions. The Act recharters the agency, as Arthur mentioned, to be focused on resiliency, affordability, and equity, and allows us to use tactical real estate tools to advance those functions. That includes the existential threat of climate change, sea level rise, adapting to heat island effects in the city of Boston. We can take real estate actions for those reasons. Affordability, which is broadly defined in the legislation, of course, as this council knows very well, the affordability of being a homeowner or renter in Boston is increasingly unobtainable to many. We are now one of the most unaffordable cities in the country, and the Act allows the city to continue to take real estate actions, or the BPDA to take real estate actions that would advance affordability goals for housing, as well as for starting and sustaining small businesses in our city. And then finally, it also is focused on social equity, making sure that as Boston grows, we grow more equitably than we have in the past, that the benefits of development are distributed more equity, and that we address historic inequitable practices in our development policy. Let's go to the next slide. Some additional details from the home rule petition. The Act does hold on to some of the more tactical powers of the BPDA or the BRA. Our ability to act as a public economic development agency, that's a best practice from many other cities. Cities often have a public economic development arm that is a quasi-governmental, as Arthur says, in many other places in the Commonwealth, that function is staffed by city employees, but we'll still absolutely have it when this Act passes. It allows the BPDA to fund worthy projects, to clear title issues related to development, and to manage any of its real estate property matters. Really importantly, the Act also holds on to the agency's Chapter 30B real estate exemption and our ability to use Chapter 121A tax tools. Those are both preserved, but again, rechartered. We can no longer use those tools for blight, substandard housing, or decadence. We have to make a finding that they are associated with resiliency, affordability, equity, community development in order to take those actions. But these are actions that the city of Boston, as several councilors pointed out in opening statements, the city of Boston today does not have those powers, does not have the power to do public-private partnerships, to create seawalls, to build affordable housing, to establish small business incubators. These are things that are not, the city is restricted from doing or often runs into legal challenges. We want to hang on to those things so that we can do those really important public sector projects in a more limited, tactical way that's associated with this rechartering in the future. Since the legislation is largely focused on urban renewal, but the BRA's history is intimately tied with urban renewal, we are also taking this opportunity to modernize the charter of the BPDA. So what this Act before you does is it recharters the BPDA's mission for affordability, equity, and resilience, but it also consolidates the BRA and the EDIC, which today are two separate quasi-governmental agencies that report to the same board. It consolidates them down into one single organization called the BPDA. So Councillor Flaherty can no longer tell us we're just doing business as. We will actually be the BPDA in the future. But this is separate. So all the obligations of both the EDIC and BRA are consolidated down into the BPDA. This includes our real estate assets, our legal obligations, our contracts, our staff. Those all flow into the new quasi-governmental organization. Many of your opening questions were surrounding some of the mayor's other proposals around moving staff, land, and money to the city of Boston. Those are actions that are not part of this home rule petition. Those would be separate votes of this council and the BPDA board. Just want to make sure that we're clarifying what's in scope for the home rule petition before you versus what are things that it would fall outside of that. And then finally, I think it's also really important for us to clarify while there's a lot of change happening, there are things that are absolutely staying the same. The BPDA board, again, as Arthur mentioned in his opening, will remain the entity overseeing development in the city of Boston. It may be staffed by city employees in the future, but we will still have a BPDA board. That board will still be 5 members. It will still be 4 members appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council, 1 member appointed by the governor. And the board will continue to approve projects through the Article 80 process. So, and we're going to work very hard to, over the course of this year, and we've announced some plans to improve the Article 80 process. We will still have Article 80 going through our projects, development projects, going through the Article 80 process to be approved by the BPDA board as the way that development projects happen in Boston. So I think I might have froze there for a second, but hopefully that helps to establish some clarity as to what is in the home rule petition and what is outside the home rule petition. And I just want to pass it back over to Arthur for any closing statements before we answer your questions.
Sure. Thanks very much, Devin. So hopefully we've managed to land firmly on the point about where development approvals are going to continue to take place and the primacy of the board and its role in making those project approval decisions. I did want to maybe add one other note to the comments and questions about the crucial and exceptional staff of the agency. I know that some of the dialogue that's gone on so far may have led people to ask some of the questions that you've asked council members. And I want you to know that as a sort of veteran of the agency in another era and as a leader today, that we are committed to make sure that our BPDA staff have the same salaries and benefits that are either the same or better when they come over to the city. It's a key aspect of what we're trying to do. The staff are what make the agency work and what allow the board to be as effective as it has become over the years. So the staff are really central to our vision for what happens here. So I know that some of the dialogue may be introducing new questions to them, but we're going to, as they say, measure twice and cut once and act very carefully with respect to those things, because again, that's the key resource of this agency is the institutional memory and experience and knowledge of both the senior and new staff. Bringing excitement and vibrance to this organization. So I just wanted to make sure you heard from us what commitment we've made to our staff, how serious that is, and the fact that we're going to take the time it takes to create a situation where a transition works and is seamless. Because I know that's central to you and many of the almost all the staff are your constituents, and they're the people who I see in the hallway here who make the agency work. And so with that, I'd love to pass it back to you, Chair, and begin to take questions about the material we presented here.
Thank you. I just want to note we've been joined by 4 more of my colleagues, Councilor Coletta, Councilor Mejia, Council President Ed Flynn, and Councilor Fernandez Anderson. We are going to now go, and if you missed any portion of that presentation, I know that that email has gone out with the PowerPoint presentation to all of our council colleagues. And so that PowerPoint is in your email inbox if you want to look at it or follow along with it or take a look at what you missed. With that, I'm going to go by order of arrival to my colleagues. I'm going to set a 5-minute timer here. I will try to break in if you are mid speaking. I'm going to try to break in as soon as I'm available, but we have a 5-minute timer that I'm going to set. We're going to start with Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flaherty, you're on deck if you want to prepare in advance, and then Councilor Louis Jen after that. So Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pass my time at the moment. I know we have new councilors who have joined us who haven't been able to speak yet, and still just listening closely and going to review the slides as I'm on. So thank you, Chair. I'll circle back at the end if there's time. Thank you.
It's their belief that this is a likely culprit for the release of COVID.
Councilor Flaherty, the floor is yours if you want to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume the BRA is still not going to pay the city rent for the 9th floor?
So with permission, I'd love for Devin to try to answer that one.
And, of course, Council, we're happy to talk with you about it over in the future, but I think that this act doesn't change anything about any of the BRA's current obligations, and we can certainly talk about that one in the future.
Particularly if they're going to derive rents and leases and what have you. So if we're going to become sort of a de facto real estate shop under the guise of a city department, we obviously, depending on how much comes into the city coffers, I guess we'd be open for a discussion on that. Take me through if you're a longtime BRA employee, 15, 18, 22 years, what happens when this all goes down?
Go ahead, Devin. You take a shot, and I'll come after you.
Happy to start. So I think maybe the way I'd start answering the question, Councilor, is if within the confines of the home rule petition, and I suspect your question might go beyond that, but within the confines of the home rule petition, if this were to pass the council and the state legislature, every BRA employee and every EDIC employee would become an employee of the new legally created Boston Planning Development Agency, BPDA. This act protects the employment structures and obligations of employees. So this is something we've taken from looking at other government consolidations in other places. We looked at the dissolution of the Mass Turnpike and the creation of MassDOT. That was something that was included in that legislation to protect the rights of employees through a transfer. So whether you're a BRA employee or an EDIC employee, through what is happening in the act before you, and all of your existing employment rights are protected. And you on the day that the act becomes law, actually I think what the home rule petition says is that there's 180 days after the act becomes law for the creation of the new agency to begin. During that 180-day period, you would become an employee of the new agency. Now, I think it's also important to stop and say that the mayor has also proposed separately that we'd be in a stronger position as a city if we were to move our planning and development staff into city employment. But that is not a part, and that there are really important questions around pensions and salary structure, employment rights, et cetera, that are really important to us. You heard Arthur just mention them. We want to make sure every employee here feels extremely protected, and that moving to city employment would only be a net benefit to them. We're working with the mayor's office, human resources, chief financial officer to be able to answer those questions. But those questions are actually outside the scope of this.
Devin, let me just interject. And buyouts for longtime BRA employees need to be on the table for folks that have invested years and years and years of service to the BRA and then feeling like the rug's being pulled out from underneath them. They ought to be given an opportunity to retire as a BRA employee. Devin, what happens to the assets, the leases, and the revenues that are controlled by the BRA EDIC now, specifically Ray Flint Marine Industrial Park and the Charlestown Navy Yard. And let me get my next question in for you to answer. Is that when you look around the city and beyond, there, I'm seeing challenging and uncertain times ahead in the market. We haven't even started to feel the pain, particularly with those around the leases as being renewed because of folks being allowed to work from home. At some point, 3, 4, 5 years, we will get a big punch in the mouth as a city on those commercial revenues. That said, the market, inflation, possible recession, interest rates, I'm concerned that introducing a new uncertainty into the development world will have a chilling effect on development here in the city. So we're at a point where we need to create more housing now. We obviously need to maintain and create more jobs now. What impact will this shift and switch have? And have you thought about how we as a city can endure that predictability piece? The predictability piece is one of the most important pieces. It's what has kept us on the map on multiple fronts. It's what keeps us on the map during down economic times. Will this create some additional uncertainty and apprehension and anxiety among those that we wish to come here, to invest here, to bring their business here? So twofold. The first question is, what about those assets and leases and the revenues that are controlled? And two, what about the chilling effect, which is real?
Devin, I hope you don't mind if I hone in on a little part of this. I'd love for you to grab the part that has to do with the what happens to our leases and property. So I would just say we're very.
I'll just say after this question, we're going to go to the next person, and then we can do another round after this.
Okay.
That is 5 minutes. Thank you. But please answer the question.
Sure. We're very focused on the predictability. One of the things that happened at the board a couple of Thursdays ago was enabled us to begin work on improving Article 80, which speaks specifically to the predictability challenges that you're speaking to. Things are going to be either the way they are now or better for both citizens and development interests as we try to simplify the process of moving forward with development while also centering so community voices there, making sure that expectations are clear. Devin, I want to give you a chance to answer the other part of the question, but we do agree with you entirely on the importance of predictability, and it's the number one thing we're working on.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Chief. To answer the councilor's questions around real estate assets, it's actually the same answer as the personnel. In the home rule petition before you, what would happen is after the act passes, there'd be a 180-day period, and then all the real estate holdings by law would transfer to the newly created Boston Planning and Development Agency. Again, there's ongoing discussion, and the mayor's outlined a very clear vision around transferring some real estate assets and revenues to the city of Boston to cover the cost of employees, but that's outside the scope of the home rule petition before you today.
Right. And thank you, Director, and thank you, Devin, and obviously thank you to the chair. My main concern is that we worry so much and we have regrets about the West End, but I guess we're remiss and fail to acknowledge the great projects that have come out of the BRA, like the PRU, the John Hancock, Post Office Square, the BCEC, the South Boston Waterfront, et cetera. So a lot of good, properly managed projects that have come along, and oftentimes those don't get discussed, but we kind of hang our hat on sort of some of the missed opportunities or some of the regrets, and clearly the West End being a piece of it, but can't speak for all the other great things that have happened through the leadership of multiple administrations and this council over the years. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Louis Jen, the floor is yours. And if anybody needs a second round, we will have a second round as required or needed. Thank you. Councilor Louis Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both Chief Jemison and Devin and Lisa for being here. And Devin, thank you for your presentation. It was clear on most things that I had questions on. I appreciate highlighting just the very specific way in which this will change the city's urban renewal powers from being able to take any legal action pertaining to what it means for a property to be blighted or substandard, which I think is the problem when we look at the West End and we look at the South End and how urban renewal was used and this blanket ability to call something blighted. Now we're changing over towards affordability, resiliency, and I think I'm missing the third one, equity. Yeah, all three really important, especially as we need to build more housing, build more affordable housing, are we going to establish metrics for what that looks like? Because I think metrics are still really important. And then secondly, will the council be getting an ordinance for what this new office of planning looks like as we shift towards really having a vision of transforming how we've done things in the past and really concentrating on planning? Like, I think it's obviously a great idea. I think it's what residents have been really calling for, but just looking to see like what can we expect next as the council when it comes to both codifying what these 3 goals mean and what the office will look like.
So I guess I'd start with the practical side. So the work to be really clear about the path to create the City Department of Planning and Design is underway. My understanding is that forming new departments usually involves a ordinance and other establishment methods, but we're doing our due diligence on that right now. I certainly think that we're going to make sure that the council is informed about the thinking on this subject. In terms of the definition and metrics, we feel similarly that metrics are important, and so I think as the other parts of the changes are described, you should expect us to clearly lay them out. The metric that I think we're currently working with has to do with the retention and attraction of current Bostonians, attraction of new Bostonians, so that we can be host to the 800,000 people that we think Boston can host in 2050. Making that goal and making it in a way that's thoughtful and prepares for the folks' housing and transportation needs does, for my partner, Chief Dillon over in housing and other places, does have specific milestones in terms of producing housing and the work we do with the rights of way and other forms of development. And that's why we're excited about the Planning Advisory Council. It's going to help us coordinate those things so that we can actually have that growth manifest in the various ways it needs to happen. But more metrics will be forthcoming. Devin, did you want to add anything?
And just wanted to also add that we're working on what both Chief Jemison and the mayor have announced as a scorecard for how Article 80 projects are evaluated that will include metrics around affordability, equity, and resilience. And we envision rolling that out in a similar way to when we rolled out the diversity, equity, and inclusion disclosure requirement in Article 80, where we start with a challenge to the development community around, please give us your best information, give us your best thinking, give us your best data. And then when they start to build that up over time into more formal data-driven requirements. So you can anticipate that coming from us soon.
Thank you. And just so that I'm clear, Devin, I know we may have talked about this before, but is that also going to be looking at the Massport model for how they do? And I know that you talked about one of the tactical tools that the city has is chapter 30 that the BPDA will continue to use is chapter 30B. So just try to think about how it all works together. And I know the BPDA has been doing work in sort of the supply side when it comes to diversity issues. So I know that there are folks who take issue with it being called the Massport model, but just thinking about how we're thinking of how we're going to use that for the third pillar here of equity, especially when it comes to making sure that there's racial equity embedded in the development process.
Yeah, absolutely, Councilor, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on that. That we've been including diversity, equity, and inclusion as a selection criteria in the development of public real estate since 2019. I think we now have over 20 projects where we've made that one of the signature evaluation points in determining which partner we're going to work with to develop a particular property. That diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria spans all phases of development, pre-development, construction, and post-development operations and ownership. That's something that we have now brought into the Article 80 process as we evaluate private development projects, and we're the first city in the Commonwealth to do that. So we're certainly going to be leaning further into that and the work that we've already done, working with this council and others. That work emulates some of the work that Massport does on public land, but we are now trying to bring that to not just our own public land portfolio, but our regulatory practice as well.
Thanks, Devin. And if I have time for one more question, Mr. Chair, there's a lot of changes proposed, and I think a lot of them are really good as we sort of move away from the old model, hopefully bringing a lot more transparency and accountability. But what is the planning? Do any of these changes relate or include the zoning commission or the zoning board of appeals? Because a lot of the changes that we're going to need to make sure that we can be building affordably and encourage more affordable housing we have to look at our zoning code. So I'm trying to get a sense of how we're looking at zoning with respect to the chances, with respect to these changes that we want to make, and what will the interplay be between this new BPDA, the Office of Planning, and the entities that have control over zoning in our city.
So, although the Councilor, although the home rule petition doesn't speak to this aspect specifically, we do have plans that have been shared that call for us to sort of form a task force to create better and more citywide zoning. We are, as you said accurately, we need to, if we're going to enable some of the development that we're talking about and the growth we're talking about, we do need improved zoning that sort of reflects our need to have growth occur in the city to achieve our housing and other goals. So we have plans that are underway that we propose to conclude, and zoning that would result from both those plans and other citywide zoning initiatives. Those zoning initiatives would go to the zoning commission, and hopefully, if we are successful and the zoning we're talking about is adopted, we're hoping that will result in fewer ZBA cases because there's more clarity about what's allowed, and it's been more recently reviewed by neighbors.
Thanks, Chief Jefferson. I appreciate that. I don't know if Devin wanted to add, but I appreciate that answer. And just want to say, like, you talking about the incredible work of your staff, and I believe there are people who are doing really good work with these plans. We get these plans and then they're not codified, and then we are just wasting our time and our resources. So I appreciate the citywide vision. Really want us to be really intentional about how we get the plans that you all work on to actually do the work of getting us more affordable housing, right? Because if there's a plan that has provision for more and then we don't codify it, it's a waste of everyone's time. So thank you, and I look forward to more discussions.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours, followed by Councilor Baker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I think for today, I thought I would just put a few things on the table that are probably more working session conversations, Mr. Chair, but like just to give the department a chance to go back and look at it. So one thing is just, we have this home rule petition has the same preamble as the home rule petition we were discussing last week, which sort of says, you know, the general court can change it in form and substance as long as it's consistent with the general public objectives. One flag that I have here is I would love, and this might be something for you, Lisa, but like, I would love for people to do a little bit of thinking about, is there some caveat we can attach to that makes it clear that were the general court to change the petition such that the city of Boston had less power than in the version of the petition that was filed, that would definitely create a context in which it would come back to the council and the mayor for action. Because my anxiety here is that, you know, we talk all the time about home rule and the fact that like our powers as a city to like do what the residents of Boston are asking us to do are constrained at the state level, and it creates a lot of difficulty, and it's a huge source of frustration for us as city councilors. And I would really hate for this process, which is doing an update that I think is really important for the reasons I alluded to earlier, to like result in the state sort of taking more power over development from the residents of Boston. And so just kind of as an institutionalist, I would love to think a little bit. I agree that like it's tough to send anything up to the State House that doesn't give them some flexibility because they're going to do their own legislative process. But something that made it clear that like it's not, if you significantly constrain the city of Boston's powers versus what we sent up to you, then it has to come back to us, and it's not, it doesn't just sort of go through as making that public general objectives test. So that's one thing I would love for folks to think about a little bit. And if you had any comments on that now.
I don't, thank you, Councillor. That's a really insightful comment and question, and I think our interests are all aligned. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I'm happy to chase that down over the next few days and work with my colleagues in IGR to figure out the right way to approach that.
Great, that would be awesome. And then the other thing is just to say, I was perusing NIOP's comments in advance of the hearing, and I'm sure that they may be commenting later, but I just did want to flag there are definitely a few of those things that I think are pretty important for the agency to have answers to by the time we're talking together about language. So, for example, being clear about how this interacts with the language of the federal law that that we continue to use, the 121A, 121B stuff seems important to me. Really clarifying, I don't think that my point of view is the same as NIOP's on, I think it's very important for us to be able to make the covenants extend indefinitely, but the question of what is that mechanism and do we feel like it's legally bulletproof and all of that doesn't seem like something that I want to leave to chance for the very reason that we extended the urban renewal zones a couple weeks ago. So I'm sure the agency's in receipt of that letter, but yeah, and if there's anything you want to say to any of its points right now, that would be great, but otherwise just would hope that we could be back on that.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Councillor. We did receive the letter shortly before the hearing today, so I had a chance to pass through it, but not to fully consider, each point as much as I would like to. I do think there are some points that are pretty easy clarifications once we've had a chance to review it more closely, and maybe some things we want to consider, and would be happy to do that with you later this week.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think those are my main, I guess maybe could you speak a little bit to, and maybe this is a Chief Jemison question or Devin, I don't know, but one point they made was kind of the idea that basically what you're doing here is, I'm trying to find the language. It's basically about the single point of contact. Oh, right. Okay. So when they say the docket creates two separate planning board functions, and they're sort of concerned about this bifurcation, I wondered if maybe you could just speak again, Chief, about what the vision there is in terms of the distinction, because I still think, I feel like this is a new institutional map that you guys have been very in the weeds of, but not everyone has. And so so I'll just read it aloud. The question that was raised by their letter was, the docket creates two separate planning board functions, the powers retained by the new BPDA under Chapter 652 of the Acts of 1960, and the new city planning department that will be created since Section 8A removes the language that abolished the city planning board. NIOP's concern is that the docket language seems to bifurcate the planning function and fails to create a single point of contact. I suspect that this distinction has something to do with the kind of planning we do for the city versus the kind of planning-informed evaluation we do of development proposals. But I just wonder if you could speak again maybe to that, Chief, because I think it's a little confusing for folks.
I'm tempted to sort of give a very broad brush answer, but I'd love it if, before I do that, Devin or Lisa, anything you would like to add before I do it?
I would, thank you, Chief. There's a really technical legislative point right here, actually, and the language that is deleted, the language from the prior acts that this act deletes is actually the language that sort of merged the EDIC and BRA functions into a planning board. So it's not really taking anything away. It's like a little cleanup change based on, something that was in the acts of 1993. So I think, I can see where it was a little bit misleading when NIOP was reading it the first time through, but it doesn't actually change the fact that the new constituted BPDA will retain our planning board functions.
Got it. And that's really helpful, Lisa. I'd still love to hear Chief Jemison.
Sure. So again, I had a chance to brief a lot of different groups of people on this. The BPDA board is still going to take your PNFs, DPIRs, FPIRs, all of the things that you need to start your project are going to be approved by the BPDA board. The staff who support that BPDA board's work are going to have the same names and addresses and scopes of work that they do today. They're going to be City of Boston staff people. So I would really like to, I know that because we've had a certain way operate for 60 years with success at most of the time, I know it's hard sometimes to hear about this change, but there's still going to be a board with the great board members that we've got. It's going to approve development, and the staff that are going to support that board are going to be here. So there's not a change in single point of contact or anything.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I imagine that's my time elapsed, so.
Indeed. I'm trying to, if that helps folks go from having one more question, get you from a second round, then I'll allow it. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If anybody does need a second round, just a FYI, we will have it. So if anybody feels like they have more questions than their time allots, then we will do a second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This isn't our only meeting here. We're going into working session after this.
The goal is to actually have this hearing and move forward to a vote on Wednesday.
I don't think we're ready for a vote. I think we need a working session, but that's just me. You probably got the votes already. So, you know, I can understand powers when it comes to blight and things like that, but powers like I'm having a hard time figuring like powers around affordability, which we already have are written in when we plan these. Resiliency, we ask for, we have a chapter 91, and we in having a lot of the shore in my district. I know the projects that are in front of me, we talk about resiliency ad nauseum, and then the equity piece. I'm a little bit confused. Devin, you talked about, around the equity piece, that land that we own, you're looking to identify, groups of color, I guess, to develop these. That's all good. But you also talked about the private developments. Can you dig into that a little bit? What does that look like for the private market? Does that mean that you are going to mandate that people take on additional team members to fill out equity requirements? I'm not sure. Can you just drill into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Councilor. So on that point, the diversity, equity, inclusion disclosure requirement in Article 80 requires developers to tell us the makeup of their teams and the participation of minority and women-owned businesses across all phases of the development life cycle in their proposal. It does not mandate the participation of MWBs.
But if you don't have enough diversity for someone on your side, then the project doesn't get approved?
That is not currently how the disclosure requirement is structured. We want to be able to evaluate and understand what the participation of minority and women-owned businesses in the real estate market in Boston. All data to date says that there's a pretty vast disparity between the diversity of Boston and the diversity of the real estate industry. So we're looking at strategies to impact that, but it is not a hard mandate to include MWBEs in your project, but we're certainly trying to encourage the participation of MWBEs in the project.
That looks like we're getting back to the Menino days. If people aren't doing what you guys are asking and what your whims are, then you're not going to get through Article 80. So that concerns me. But whatever, it is what it is. So we can't get into a public-private partnership now to build a resiliency wall. We need this legislation to do that.
That's a great question. You asked that previously. I want to make sure you get a chance to address it and turn it over to Chief Jemison to go further. But just give you a quick, I guess the quick answer is the city of Boston is empowered to purchase property through Chapter 30B for municipal purposes. Affordable housing is not a municipal purpose. Public housing, the BHA, that's a municipal purpose. But affordable housing, as the industry operates today, that's not a municipal purpose. Nor is purchasing property and subdividing it for economic development interests or small business participation. So a very quick but recent example of this is there was a property that was privately held. It was a housing vacant home that was adjacent to some wetlands in Roslindale. It was vacant. It was up for sale. The owner really wanted to sell it within 3 months. They said, hey, City of Boston, we know you want this for access to the wetlands. If you can buy it from us in the next 3 months, then we'll sell it to you. City of Boston can't do that. Because it's a direct negotiation. And while the city could go through an advertisement process to purchase the property that's fairly lengthy and acquire it for wetlands access, it would have to remain wetlands access. What we were able to do is to quickly engage in a negotiation using our 30B exemption to acquire that property, subdivide the property into 2 parcels. One, we transferred to the Conservation Commission, which is now the access to the wetlands. The other, we put out for RFP and now working with Habitat for Humanity to develop 4 units of affordable home ownership. So that, and in partnership with MOH. That's a project that we had to shoehorn our blight finding into because of the vacancy of the building. But if this new home rule petition passes, we would be empowered to routinely do that type of transaction, which the city of Boston cannot do.
But so that's going to happen through the board now. It's not through BPDA, because the rest of just the board is going to act, and they're going to do land transfers, so the board can buy land, and the board can accept mitigation money, and the board will accept linkage money.
Yes, that's accurate. Council. Turn over to Lisa for clarification.
Going to be an uptight lawyer on with this piece. It's the agency will still exist and have its members, the board, that will manage its affairs as it does today.
So that board will be sitting on top of a large cachet, and then we will be paying, the city of Boston, our general budget will pay all the employees up there on the 9th floor now. So how does, what's the mechanism for the board to help us pay for all their employees?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilor. And I just want to make sure I clarify that that's outside the scope of the home rule petition before you today. The home rule petition before you today takes the BRA and the EDIC and consolidates it into a new agency with a new charter and new mission. It doesn't move any staff to the city of Boston.
So how are all those changes going to happen if that's what the end game is, and when is that going to happen?
Those would have to be votes of both the BPDA board and the city council, and we'd absolutely need to answer for you the question around what are the new expenses incurred. That depends on the number of staff transferred, and how are those. We're not anticipating that the city of Boston is going to come up with new revenues to cover those costs. So those would need to be borne by revenue transfers from the BPDA, and we need to explain for you in great detail how that would operate. But we're not here today with those details. We need to do significant due diligence and come before you with that.
Devin, you're short on details here today, but we're going for a vote on Wednesday.
The vote, I want to be very clear, the vote on the home rule petition does not cover and does not address the concerns that you're raising. This is specifically.
But I mean, if we're changing the entire way we do business, I think we should know all the details, and I just don't think that we're ready for a vote on Wednesday. That's all I'm going to say about it. I think we need to go into at least one in-person working session, because having this meeting on TV here, I don't think is the right way to do it. I think we should have at least one working session so we can work this out. Thin on details. I understand you're changing the charter. That's all well and good, but there's way more to this here. You change the charter, and then you start making all these other changes that we won't be won't be part of. That's my opinion there. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we should have a working session, and I don't think this is ready for a vote on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. I hear you. Councilor Lara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And most of my questions, because and Devin, please feel free to correct me in terms of the scope of this home rule petition, because I know that we talked a little bit. And one of the concerns for me that came up when we were having conversations about this transition from the BPDA, I guess one of the benefits of having the BPDA or the BRA kind of being a quasi-governmental agency that I've heard, at least from people who were working there and from my conversations with a lot of you all, is really this idea of the financing and how that was really an asset and gave y'all some flexibility in terms of what we were able to do. And I know that the last time that we talked, you said, we don't really know how we don't have a lot of details in terms of how we're correcting for that or the possibility of that. This home rule petition does not impact that. And so I'm assuming that you don't have any further detail in terms of what solutions what direction you're moving into in terms of the financial aspect of it.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Chief, would you like
no,
to?
You go.
Just to hit on the technical specifics again, the home rule petition only covers the future of urban renewal and the consolidation of the EDIC BRA into one new entity, the BPDA. To advance the mayor's vision of moving staff into the city, there are a lot of details that we need to have a whole series of meetings and working sessions to cover. We're eager to do that, but that's not why we're here.
So eventually, when we move in that direction, you will have answers for how we're, what's that's going to look like for.
Yeah, yes, and with permission, Council, I would just say, the kind of work that it takes to create a new department, create positions, go through the process of allocating budget for that. I certainly heard the Council member Baker's questions about how we're going to fund the support of those staff. Those are all things we expect to take place over. It's not going to happen this budget season. We're expecting it to happen as part of the next fiscal year. This fiscal year will be focused on a much smaller number of staff people to help us with the Planning Advisory Council. But I think doing that right takes a series of steps, which the council will be critically involved with, both in the budget process and other related processes. So I want to make sure that you've heard that the action we're trying to take today has explicitly to do with urban renewal and the charter of the agency, not the sort of administrative aspects that you guys have asked very appropriate questions about, but will be answered as we approach not the budget season that we're in today, but the next budget season.
Thank you, Chief. That's incredibly helpful. I think what I'm bumping into is that the way that we're asking our questions, you typically have to have some level of understanding of what's going on. And so I'm trying to ask more pointed questions that will clarify for the folks that are watching what is actually happening. And so my second question falls along those same lines. The change in the charter maintains the BPDA as a quasi-governmental agency, or does it also bring it under mayoral and city council control right away?
So the what it brings under, explicitly, we're going to continue to have a BPDA board representative agency, as Lisa called it. That board is separate from the city. That's the way that the tools and instruments that the Commonwealth gives to the cities functions. Now this is not explicitly in the proposed home rule petition, but what's been proposed is that the staff who support the work of those boards would be city employees, not unlike other major cities of the state. So what would come under city council review and jurisdiction would be the staff, people like me, and the staff of the agency who provide support to that board. That's what, again, there's more details to be laid out as part of probably the 2024-25 fiscal year budget, but that's the envisioned approach, is that the board would remain separate. Now, Lisa and Devin may be able to provide more background about why the board would remain separate because of the legal elements of it. So I might ask them to just clarify, and then I'll go right. I'm sorry to dwell too long.
No, please, that's fine. Thank you. I really appreciate your responses. And so I think that this home rule petition, what we're really doing is that we're taking a first step, right? There's a number of steps that we have to take in order to kind of fulfill the vision of really bringing planning into the city of Boston in a way where we can be more accountable to our constituents. And I understand that this home rule petition is only a very small part of doing that. So I'm grateful for all the work that you've done. I will echo Councillor Bach's concern about the State House, and so if there's any way to ensure whether it be some amendment in the to the home rule petition, or if there's any other way for us to ensure that we're not going to end up with the short end of the stick by sending another amendable home rule petition up to the State House. I would really advocate for that. And I'm curious, in the long-term plan, if there are any functions around planning, or if there are any staffing assets or any type of the budget that we can move from the BPDA into city departments before we kind of go through our long story process of this transition. Are there any small changes that we can make that will get us closer to our vision in a practical way, like in a functional way right now?
That's a great question, Councilor, and I think one thing that the council should be anticipating for the FY24 budget submission is for the mayor to propose a planning advisory council, which is something that she's spoken about in State City and other places. She issued an executive order about its creation, and the vision, that's a net new creation of a new team that is responsible for bringing together all the cabinets that have a hand in planning the built environment. Of course, the BPDA does a lot of work in land use planning, but we have colleagues that work in environment and open space to do open space and climate resiliency planning. We have colleagues that work in housing that do housing planning. There's lots of colleagues in transportation that do transportation planning. The goal of this new advisory council is to bring all of that together, coordinate it, and tie it to capital investment. And so that is envisioned to have an executive director. That job is posted, but also some staff, and that's a net new investment that the mayor will bring before the council through as part of the budget process.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know that there's like some movement, that we're not going to ultimately have to wait until we get to the end to start making some changes. But that has opened up a new entire set of questions that I will wait to ask when that comes across our desks. So thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Coletta, who will be followed by Councilor Mejia. Councilor Coletta.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief. Thank you, Devin, Lisa, for your work on this. I have been very vocal already just about the tools of urban renewal and just how powerful they are. I see this as a way to take them and make them work for us rather than against us. So I am pleased to see climate resiliency as a pillar priority. I know I've been beating the drum on this since becoming councilor, and it has been extremely difficult to try to coordinate, get the economic resources that we need to make certain things happen, like seawalls, and push everybody to move in one direction, both private and public. And Chief, this is something that we talked about at my hearing a couple months ago. So I am extremely pleased to see that. Like I mentioned, a lot of my questions have been answered, specifically around staffing and just the fiscal authority that the mayor and the council will have ultimately for the BPDA. And so I think, I'm just going to put it out there that I think legally any new department or cabinet agency has to come to the city council via ordinance. And so I know that a lot of these details will be ironed out in that process, and I do look forward to that. But when it comes to the goals of resiliency, and I'll just focus my questions on this, and then I have another one about the Charlestown Navy Yard. When we're talking about specific actions that the agency can take to prepare and implement plans for climate resiliency, I saw creating seawalls as a strategy. Can you just talk about the specific actions that this is supposed to enable us to do, or any other resiliency strategies, and how are you going to be working with the Environment Department? Is it going to be through this planning board that you just mentioned, or is it some other task force?
So I've got a team who can help me answer this question fully, but I think the first pass would be we've worked closely with Chief White Hammond in the formation of a coastal resilience implementation sort of task force. We are expecting, they have a lot of the policy experience and knowledge, and we have a lot of the development experience and knowledge. We're going to bring those things together to tackle some of the places in the city, like Border Street or Moakley Park, other parts of the city where there's a real threat of inundation by water but we also have a chance to really create something exceptional. So to go to your second question very briefly, today, I can use the powers of the agency to acquire land because if I make a finding that that land is blighted, or it's providing substandard housing, or it's decadent in some way, I can't make a finding that the city is under threat from climate change, and I need to build a seawall or nature-based solution for protecting the city. I can't make a finding that I need to do that and then do it. I'd have to find some way to sort of make it consistent with blight, decadence, or substandard housing. So the charter will allow me to make a finding that we need to protect, residents of Mary Ellen and Old Colony, other parts of South Boston from water by acquiring a piece of property potentially, or that might make the Moakley Park project happen more quickly. That's something I'll be able to do under the new rules. Same thing for Border Street in Eastie and other parts of the city, down into Ponset. So there's a lot of different. That's what it gives me the ability to do that I can't do today. I think there was a third question you asked, Councilor, but I might ask my colleagues who have a better memory potentially to answer. Or did I get them all?
I think you got them all.
I think you got them all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And so if I'm understanding correctly, this will allow you to acquire property or compel developers to assist in our climate goals. And I'm happy to actually hear you say nature-based solutions, because I had only seen seawalls in the presentation. And so I just wanted to better understand, what are our overarching goals here, and how can we just make sure that they are aligned with our Environment Department, while also working in tandem with existing plans like Plan East Boston and Plan Charlestown. And it's not going to be affected by some of these changes. So thank you for that. I think that answers my question. And then the other part of this, Councilor Flaherty mentioned the Charlestown Navy Yard, and that was going to be the first part of my question is, how does this impact? And it sounds like it won't. Will there be any sort of notice or formal communication to Charlestown residents just about these changes, and if they have any questions, to contact somebody? I think that might be good for all of us, because I will certainly be getting questions and comments from the Navy Yard of people who have leases. So that's more of just a suggestion than anything, if you already had planned to do that and communicate that out to residents.
We certainly have a community engagement team here at the BPDA who's very well briefed on our transformation efforts, and that team is fairly well integrated in the Charlestown Navy Yard. So yes, absolutely, as this proceeds, we certainly anticipate doing community engagement around the various pieces of the future of the BPDA, including what we're here before you today.
Thank you. Chair, that's it for my question. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Mejia, followed by Council President Flynn.
It's Happy Independence Day for La República Dominicana. So I just want to give a shout out. No, let me just get serious here before people, but Happy Independence Day. So I'm just curious, can you just expand a little bit more on the new planning principles in regards to resiliency, affordability, and equity? If you could just kind of unpack that a little bit further, that would be really helpful. And is there a list of income restricted affordable housing by district? Is the 11K number a rough estimate? So I'm just curious about like where we land with that. And then I want to dig in a little bit more into the community engagement piece of the work. You know, I know that this is the effort to add the planning into the development piece, which is all about uplifting community voice. And I'm just curious what that process is going to look like in terms of implementation. What I have found is that, you know, we're really good at giving the aspirational impact of what we're trying to do with these ordinances. But I think in terms of implementation, that sometimes things, you know, that's where we kind of fall short as a city. So if you could just kind of guide us through how you're going to measure success when it comes to community engagement, you know, what types of accountability tools are you going to be using, you know, to help ensure that we, the integrity of the process is really rooted in people. So just kind of walk me through that and what that looks like for you. Thank you.
So, Councilor, thank you for the question. The easy answer is the second question, which has to do with we have a team member who can we can forward you immediately a district-based list of the properties that have LDAs on them, so that you can have that information. So that's the easiest question to answer quickly. Second question would be, so the agency has the ability to undertake certain actions when it makes a finding of something. Today, that's blight, decadence, and substandard housing, very much consistent with the attitudes and approaches of 1960, and also aligned with federal programs that were being offered by the federal government to cities to use capital that came from the federal government. They could make investments if they could make those kinds of findings, if they had blight, decadence, or substandard housing. What we're proposing is that instead of those three elements of the charter that we have, resilience, equity, and affordability, specifically that when we made a finding that by buying a certain property under the powers of the agency, we could potentially protect the city better from climate change, or if by using some of the powers of the agency to offer tax relief, for example, we could thereby make it possible for a development to be affordable. That's a second thing, or produce more housing to lower the cost of housing in the city. Or by the same token, if there was a tax relief program that had equity benefits that we could identify, that's another thing that we could look at. Those are, if I made a finding, for example, that I needed to take a property that would enable the Moakley improvement or Border Street or other parts of the city to have a resilience improvement, that's what we mean by, that's why those three words are important in the charter. So I think I got two of your questions, and there was a third one about community engagement. Separate from this home rule petition, we have an RFP that we are releasing to help us identify the community engagement aspects of our Article 80 process that can be improved. Again, we've got a system that is quite functional, but we have ways of making it more predictable for citizens and centering their voices, along with making it simpler for developers. That we think is going to be very productive, and community engagement is a key part of that. Devin, or at least anything you want to add?
Just very briefly, I just wanted to highlight on the first point that Chief Jemison brought up, the urban renewal restriction, land use restriction dashboard is available online. So we absolutely would love to walk you through, Councilor, all the restrictions in your district. That's also generally available to the public at large on our website.
Thank you for that. Now, I think that we have an amazing opportunity here and an obligation as per the PowerPoint presentation that you guys ran us through. And this was a quote directly from, our mayor, is, I think there's a lot happening in the city. There's a lot of shifts happening, right? And all because these are the things that this moment is calling for. But I think for the sake of those who are tuning in and are paying attention to all of these changes that we're making, if you could tell us, for those folks who have been traditionally, left out of these conversations, when we think about the number of people that we have displaced from the city who now are living in Brockton or still in other spaces and places because they can't afford to live here. How is what we're proposing now going to, in plain, just keep it plain and simple, in the most layman's term, why is something like this in this moment going to help the people that we serve?
Devin, you can go first.
Yeah,
I can go.
Happy to start. I think, plain and simple, we have an agency that was built in 1960 for 1960s problems. We need an agency in 2023 for 2023's problems. Chief among those, in the framing that you just put forward, Councilor, which I think is super important, is the affordability of our city, both in housing and in creating and sustaining small businesses. If passed, this legislation before you will help us do that.
Okay, so here's what I need, right? Just because I think it's important for those who follow, at least those who follow me, to know, what's going to be that return on that investment in terms of outcomes? How many people are we going to keep here in the city of Boston? How many businesses are we going to help to support? Give me some numbers and some data that will help drive the point home in terms of where we want to go. And you're absolutely right. 2023 demands us to meet this moment. So I think that it would really be helpful for those who are tuning in to just get some numbers, just high numbers, just pie in the sky if you really want to go there, but just help our viewers understand kind of what this moment means and what that return on that investment is going to look like.
I guess I'd start and turn over to Chief Jemison, but I think one of the really important metric the mayor's talked about is growing our city to 800,000 people. And one of the reasons why she's focused on that number rather than housing unit creation or square footages is because she wants our planning processes to be centered on people, and that as our city grows, what the existing residents of our city and the future residents of our city need. I think another really important metric will be the proportion of that new housing stock that is built that is income restricted affordable or even free market affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable housing that is accessible to Bostonians at all income levels. That we do not have enough middle class housing in our city today, so that having metrics around both housing for people who are at lower incomes but also moderate incomes, super important. The retention and growth of our small business sector, working with our colleagues in economic development, opportunity inclusion. I think there are incredibly important metrics there. We can keep on expounding on this and go to some more climate resilient metrics around square footages of seawall or climate protected open space that protect the. They're ultimately an existential threat to the city of Boston. So the billions of dollars of New England's economy that is protected by us taking forward-looking actions today along the water's edge, I think is another way to quantify our return on investment here.
No, I appreciate that. And the reason why I'm following this through line, right, is because they're all, for folks who aren't policy wonks or who aren't in the weeds of this, they end up in situations, everything is always just a different name. And that we have really good intentions, right? So I just want people to know that what we're trying to do is definitely, in the way that we're moving, is to meet the moment, as you mentioned, and as the PowerPoint expressed. And I just think it's important for those who are tuning in is that this is also about making sure that we pump the brakes on displacement here in the city of Boston, and that when we're thinking about affordable, we're also identifying affordable to whom and what that looks like. And I'm going to assume that the planning process and the way we move about this, because it says it's going to be people-centered, that the people who are driving these conversations are the people who are hoping to stay here in the city of Boston, correct?
Yes.
For the record, I just need to hear that. For the record and a commitment for those who are listening in, this is going to be the pathway for us to stay here in the city of Boston, correct?
Certainly in combination with other tools. I think that we don't want to project that BPDA change is a panacea that will solve all things, but directionally, in terms of addressing displacement, keeping local families in our community, inviting new families at all income levels to our community, this is why we're advanced. These are the values that are driving this change.
And the reason why I'm not to say that you guys are going to be the answer and the silver bullet to answer all of our housing problems, but because we're centering it in planning, that we're going to be more intentional about how we plan for the city of Boston, and doing so in a way that centers community and those who have been paving the way here for us to be able to stay, right? So it's really uplifting that. So I just wanted to for those who are paying attention to know that this is a direction that you're trying to move in to address some of the concerns that have been brought forth. I know my time is up, and I do appreciate the chair, Councilor Arroyo, for allowing me to go a little bit over. I'll stay tuned for an additional second round if one should be afforded to us. Thank you.
Thank you. People will have access to a second round if you have second round questions. Council President Ed Flynn, followed by Councilor Fernandez Anderson. Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be with you, Mr. Chair, and with Mr. Jamison and with Devin as well. Apologize for being, and to Lisa, I'm sorry, Lisa. I also apologize for being a little late. I was at a National Disabled Veterans Conference in DC. So my comments or questions, let me start with this one. What happens to assets and leases and revenues controlled by the BRA EDIC, namely at the Ray Flynn Marine Park and Charlestown Navy Yard?
Everyone want to take a first stab at that?
Happy to answer that one, Councilor. So the answer to this one is similar to the answer to some of the questions that Councilor Flaherty raised. In the context of the legislation before you today, what happens to BPDA, so BRA or EDIC obligations, including revenues, real estate assets, and personnel, is that upon passage of this legislation, both at the council level and at the state house, there's a 180-day period, and then the new agency, which we formerly known as the BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, is created, and all of those obligations flow to that new agency.
This is a major policy change, it seems. So I want to follow up with that, Devin or to Arthur. Are we giving the city council, and Lisa, are we giving the city council more power in the development and planning process? And what is the role of the city council? It seems like the council will play a more critical role as we go forward, and if this home rule is approved. Is that correct? And can you expand on that?
So, sure. This specific home rule petition doesn't address the aspect you're talking about. However, just to make sure we're answering it, if the mayor's stated intent to move the staff who support the board, there's going to continue to be a BPDA board that's going to approve development and have certain special powers to acquire property and provide tax sort of tax arrangements. If the mayor's initiative as described goes forward, the staffing, the people who staff that board, the same way they do in other cities in Massachusetts, will work for the city. And so their budget will come before you as part of the budget process. So there won't be new council activity on the board or interaction with the board, but there will be oversight of the budget of the staff like me and the staff who work for me here at the agency. That is something that would happen, but not as part of this action specifically. Hopefully that provides some more clarity, but I'm happy to keep answering.
No, it does, Arthur. It does provide more clarification, although I don't necessarily want to see more council involvement in the process, to be honest. I also know we're coming out of a pandemic and we have economic challenges. Have we engaged the business community on the impact this will have on development proposals, projects, planning in the short term and long term?
So, I mean, Devin and Lisa can feel free to add here, but I've had several briefings on this with different groups. I think that everyone's number one question is the BPDA board going to continue to review and approve my projects? And I've been able to say to them directly, yes, that's not changing. And will the BPDA still be able to do sort of 121As, as the sort of developers would say, and give me a concessionary tax agreement on something I'm doing that's good? And I'll be able to say to them, yes. In fact, now we'll be able to do it for reasons that are, in the past you might have been trying to jam a definition of a problem into, being blight or decadence or substandard housing. Now, if you're doing something about climate change, like implementing an innovative energy system, or doing more affordability than is required, or things like that, you'll be able to get tax relief. Those are how I've been able to answer the questions that business leaders have been asking me.
Thank you, Arthur. I guess my other comment is this certainly brings out some uncertainty in the planning process as developers seek to work with the BPDA and city officials on what they want to see and what they would like to do moving forward. Do we have an idea of what your community outreach would be before the city council votes on this, the engagement of residents, the engagement of the development community? But I want to make sure that the development community is also heard. We are going to ensure that residents are heard, but I want to make sure the development community is heard. A lot of the economy in Boston obviously revolves around the development community paying high property taxes. Are you committed to engaging the development community going forward?
Okay. I was going to say absolutely, but Devin, do you want to add something?
I think I just wanted to, before you answer the development community perspective, I just wanted to make sure I answered the question around what's before the council today, which largely relates to the future of urban renewal and the urban renewal structures of the agency. And I want to give credit to Chris Breen, who's our urban renewal manager, who's actually conducted 2 years of community outreach regarding the use of urban renewal in our communities. I think by and large heard a lot of feedback around, wow, this really does protect some important things in our community. And maybe there are reasons why we might want to use some of these tools in the past, but it does seem very antiquated, and it certainly it has a legacy of social injustice. So I want to make sure we convey that we've done the detailed level outreach on urban renewal itself. It's led to the home rule petition that's before you, that I think navigates both the what we want to hold on to, but urban renewal once provided the city while ending that era of Boston's history and providing predictability in terms of how development will happen in the future. But that's the community aspect. But I want to turn over to Chief Jennison for the development community aspect.
So I would, the short answer is, of course. I'd love to maybe talk outside of this forum or whenever it's possible. Talk about what specific outreach you're seeking, because I'm in regular. I think they probably started to NAIOP and ABC and all the other groups that that many of the other groups you'd probably be questioning about, I'm a frequent visitor to them, but I'm absolutely happy to increase those visits and widen them to include new groups, of course.
Thank you, Chief Jamison. Then my final comments, I don't necessarily need a response, but Devin, I want to highlight, and you mentioned Chris Breen, staffer at the BPDA. 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Chris when BPDA wasn't doing any language access in Cantonese in Chinatown. In working with Chris Breen, he was really the person that made that happen, working with me. So want to acknowledge the professionalism and hard work of Chris Breen. The other thing I want to add is when we're doing development projects, one major concern I have is the transportation aspect, especially down the South Boston waterfront. It is a working port, a thriving port, and we are impacting the port negatively with a lot of missteps we're making in transportation implementation and transportation planning. We're making it very difficult for truck who bring supplies in and out of the port to be successful. So I wanted to just mention that. And also my final point is I hope we have to the chair, I hope we have a robust discussion about this before we have a formal vote on this on the council, because there's a lot of important subjects here. So just want to stress to the chair that I hope we don't rush this process and give it an ample opportunity for residents to be heard, for the business community to be heard. But about the last thing I want to do is rush this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, and then I see Councilor Murphy has your hand up, so I will go to you, and then we will do a second round, so that would be Councilor Flaherty, and then I will go at the end of all of that. But Councilor Anderson, if you have any questions. I see you unmuted. Can you hear me, Councilor Anderson? We'll go to Councilor Murphy, and then Councilor Anderson when your connection works better.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure where I was in that second round, so I just wanted to make sure I could jump back in, so thank you. A few things. One, I had asked at the beginning, and I don't think that question has been answered or clearly yet, is how much will it cost? And will it cost close to $60 million for us to transfer staff with this change? I have not heard that answer yet clearly. And also want to say on the record that I really do think we need to pump the brakes. There have been lots of votes that I have felt that we rushed to a vote on Wednesday, and one Zoom meeting for me is not enough to, really understand if this big change, which you had said, Devin, and Councilor Mejia had asked, right, to have it clear, like what positive is going to come out of this, and the hope that addressing displacement, need for building and increasing housing stock, and the need for middle-class housing are all things I think everyone on this call agrees and understands the very important things we need for our city moving forward. But does the change in this drastic shift, will it address it? I'm not convinced that I've been told that the plan in place and the way this home rule is written, and that will we be able to circle back to some questions like you had made clear, Chief Jemison, that some of the questions we have aren't written in this home rule. Will we be sitting in front of another home rule? Like, will we get there to actually be able to then ask the questions many of us have? And another question I have is, why are we tying, I can assume I know why, but why are we tying the urban renewal, which we had a wonderful hearing, and want to echo what Council President Flynn said. Chris Breen came with wonderful breakdown of questions we had last spring and came back with a lot of good information and data that we needed to, and I agree that the plan to postpone that is important, but tying it into this vote, which has come up, since I've been on the council, there have been a few votes to go on home rule petitions that are tied in with things that, so you kind of like some, there's a timeline on some of the things, others we can wait on. So I don't want to feel pressured in making this big decision. So hoping, I know there were a few questions and a few statements and all of that, but wanted to just make sure I put all that out there.
Counselor, thank you. Hopefully to answer your first question directly. So this action that's before you today does not take any action to move staff people to the city. So if this is an act that cleans up and updates the authorizing legislation for the BRA and EDIC, turning them into the BPDA. The place to look for discussion of moving staff to the city is not this year's budget cycle. It's probably next year's budget cycle at the soonest. So if there's a place that the issue of the resources to have the staff that currently serve the BPDA board become part of the city is a discussion that's going to happen next year. It's not a discussion that'll happen this year. This year, there'll probably be a discussion about a small number of positions on the city side, specifically in the mayor's office of housing, and potentially a couple of new staff people for a planning advisory council. But there will not be movement of the 95% of the staff of the BPDA until sometime in the future, probably next budget season. So the exact cost and the parameters and all of it are elements that we're working out and conceiving. I think you can expect that we'll be visiting with the council in a less formal way to talk about what may be intended there, but that isn't on tap in today's discussion.
But it does put us on the path that we would be having that conversation next year.
It would be a first step to having that conversation.
It puts us in the lane to move forward in that direction. And if we're in the lane to move forward, can we get ourselves out of that lane and move back if we then decide, or the information is then finally shared about the cost, is it worth it? Will we be able to address the issues that I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth now, but hoping a working session, though, I think it's important that we really hash out these questions, because what's 5% of 60 million? That's still a lot, right? So do we know what the 5% of the employee movement will cost the city?
So again, we've got 200 staff people. We're talking about a very small number of them potentially going over to the city and the budget that's before you. I think something like 8 to 10 positions. There won't be any. The actual proposal to take the action you're talking about wouldn't take place until next year. So that's not to say we're not working on creating a seamless, appropriate plan that sort of respects our staff and gets them the commitments that they deserve around the salaries and benefits that they enjoy today being the same or having choices for better. That's the full intent of what we're hoping to do in the next budget season. But that's not that's not a answer I've got today.
And I just want to reiterate that the legislation before you today is primarily concerned with the future of urban renewal, and it is totally paired with the vote you took a couple of weeks ago around extending urban renewal plans for 2 years. The purpose of doing that extension was so that we could bring forward a solution that would last and beyond that 2-year extension. So here we are. That's what we are presenting today. What we believe is an elegant solution that allows us to end urban renewal in the city of Boston while retaining the important community restrictions and community use restrictions that community members enjoy, and then tying that to a cleanup of the BRA, EDIC, a consolidation and a rechartering that's tied to that future of urban renewal. It is a very separate and distinct vote than votes that would be necessary for transferring city employees. It does not obligate the council to take, if you were to approve this home rule petition, would not obligate you to approve other functions, although the mayor has been clear about her intent. We are excited to talk to you about that.
But we could amend this home rule petition to only address the need or want to extend urban renewal.
I would suggest that that's largely what it does. Right,
but there's a little bit that it doesn't, and that's where I'm a little concerned, or a lot concerned, especially on like a Zoom with just boxes. And
sure,
this is a big decision for our city.
Sure. Councillor, if I could jump in for a moment, the home rule petition in front of you today, the only thing it really does with respect to employees is propose that if and when it is passed on the effective date, all of the EDIC employees and all of the then BRA employees will become employees of the new BPDA at that point. And it's got other stuff in here to protect the rights of those employees, to make sure that when that day comes, no one's losing anything. But that's really, all in furtherance of this new agency with the new charter.
And how many employees are there in those two agencies you just said?
I'm looking at Devin or Arthur it's about 100 and
about 250.
Right, so it's more than just the 4 or 5 that may shift over to the mayor's office of housing.
Correct, but this is the transfer of the employees will be done automatically with the passage and effective date of this legislation. It will be, I think, a very seamless transition for everyone involved.
We should just be clear, the transfer, you're talking about EDIC and BRA becoming the same, becoming BPDA. Yes. We're not talking about people moving from the city, from BPDA to the city.
Correct. This is what is here today in the home rule petition.
Okay.
And to just further clarify, because I just want to make sure we're very explicitly answering your question about the financial costs, because I think it's critically important and a really important question for the council to make sure we have absolute clarity on. Voting on this home rule petition as it exists before you today does not impact the city's budget. It would be separate votes later that would impact the city's budget. This keeps all the revenues and all expenditures within the quasi-governmental agency.
It will impact employees, though, and I think Councilor Flaherty explained that well about his concerns, and I agree with what he had said, that it is individuals. I mean, does the money come from A or B overall? Maybe at this point it doesn't, but there has been statements out there that this transfer could cost up to $60 million. So wondering where does that number come from? Why would people think that?
I guess I don't know. Certainly we haven't made any statement like that. We haven't estimated that. Again, I think we shared that it's our plan that any significant transfer beyond what's been described today of any staff from the BPDA to the city would be part of the very specific and detailed budget proposal for not the fiscal year that we're in, but the next fiscal year. And so well before any kind of transition could take place or would be conceived to take place, there will be a very thorough and comprehensive budget proposal that will detail budget proposal. There'll be a request for the formation of a department. There'll be the request for all the things attending that. I know, among other things, Council Flaherty's been focused on the need for there to be ordinances that establish departments. So there's many very significant thresholds we have to cross that require council approval and consent and involvement before any staff beyond the small number of positions we've described earlier, go anywhere from leaving the BPDA and coming to the city.
Thank you. One quick last question, and thank you, Chair. Do we have a number of staff that have left since the transition of Ryan Golden leaving the department, since like that time frame?
So we do keep good data about departures and arrivals. I think that we are up approximately 20 people net since the time that he was the leader of the agency. So I think we can give you a more detailed number.
So everyone's still there and we've hired 20 new people?
No, we have, between people who've left and people who've come, we have 20 more people.
Yeah, not who've come in to replace, but how many people have left?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a different piece of information.
I mean, because I know we're having a staffing shortage across all departments, and knowing that we don't always fill positions as quickly, but my concern isn't will positions be filled? How many people have left, either voluntarily or not? I don't need that information, but it would be helpful to know how many people have left the department.
Okay, so we'll prepare an analysis of that question and respond to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flaherty, I saw your hand was up, but before I go to you, I'm going to give Councilor Anderson a chance because she had technical difficulties and she didn't do her first round, but we are going to you. Also, just to be clear for my colleagues, we will have a working session on Friday. We'll take this up probably after that working session. So there will be a working session, but I do just want to note that much of the concerns that I've heard today in this Zoom call aren't directly relevant to what's before us today. So just come ready for Friday, and then if you guys have any actual textual changes or amendments or things that you actually have an issue with what's in front of you for Friday, we can have that conversation. I'll dive more into that when it's actually my time to ask questions of the chief and the administration. But we'll have a working session on Friday, which I think is already scheduled, and then we will bring this up for a vote next week. Councilor Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess just thinking about urban renewal in general and the harm that it caused, I guess I would say that in general, Black and brown communities are very distrusting of BPDA, and I'm interested in understanding or learning about any types of community engagement. And I heard Council President Flynn mention community engagement, but mine is specific to educating the public on urban renewal, sunset in comparison to it, not sunsetting here the presentation that you have for us, but in a more user-friendly, just, everyday constituent, user-friendly type of presentation. What efforts have you put out in order to educate or have conversations with community so that we can build relationships with BPDA?
I can start on that one and turn it over to the chief. So maybe to answer that question in two parts. One would be around urban renewal itself, and as mentioned earlier, Chris Breen, as our urban renewal manager, has worked with all previously 14 plan areas in Boston across many city council districts. And now we're down to 12, but held community meetings, multiple community meetings, and every one of those areas met with community members, had one-on-one meetings as well over the course of 2+ years to hear from residents, hear their concerns, hear what they would want to see in terms of the future of urban renewal that helped us craft this plan today. And then separately, in terms of what we do as a planning agency and a public real estate development agency, community engagement is at the core of what we're doing. We're continuing to build out and expand our community engagement team. As you know very well, Councilor, before we do any sort of public land disposition or public land action, we do a thorough visioning session with community members. We engage members of the public, hear what they want to achieve, work with community members to write those requirements into our RFPs, and then invite community members into the selection process to help us make the right determination as to what the right way to move forward on property is. It's very similar, perhaps more robust effort on our planning efforts. In your district, we held almost 3 years of community process, 60+ meetings and engagements to help create Plan Nubian Square, which has led to disposition of public property in that neighborhood. So as a sort of fundamental tenet, community engagement is core to what we do as a planning, development, and real estate agency, but also something we can always get better at, and I'm excited to work with the council and community stakeholders around how, as we chart a new future, we can do that here.
Thank you, Devin. I guess my questions would have been more in preparations to this filing, so that you have been doing, or just in general, you've been doing community engagement and sessions or educating the community. I know that in District 7, folks have not recently, I'm not saying, a couple months ago, but recently has not received any workshops or listening sessions or community conversations. So just wondering, and so if, happy to partner with you and look at ways to bring information to District 7. I guess that's the goal of the question here. And in your presentation, it states that urban renewal provides zoning tools that accelerate the construction of important development projects. Can you sort of tell me the difference between that and what the mayor's proposing separately? And I guess in having the advisory council that she's going to put together, she's going to figure out how to do that same thing, right? Construction, to accelerate the construction of important projects. But if urban renewal also does that, can you separate that for me?
Maybe I would start by saying there's I think probably the best distinction is at the neighborhood level versus the project level. So in the urban renewal portfolio of tools, there's the opportunity for what we call U-district zoning, which would be replaced with affordability, resilience, and equity-driven zoning tools that would allow us to accelerate specific projects with project-specific zoning envelopes. That's different than large-scale comprehensive planning for the future, and a coordinated cross-departmental planning is meant to be something that the planning advisory council would bring together all of our cross-functional leaders and help us advance a coordinated vision for Boston's future, thereby getting that into zoning, thereby allowing multiple projects to move forward more quickly. But maybe that's a high-level answer to a technical question.
No, it's fine. It's a good segue to my next question. You mentioned that your diversity and inclusion program have been increasing numbers of Black and Brown developers. Can you provide a list that compares to their white counterparts? Can you provide, through the chair, can you provide a list, some sort of ledger that shows?
Yes, happy to provide. We're very, very happy to provide all the data that we've received since we created the diversity, equity, inclusion disclosure requirement in Article 80.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's a formal request. Now, in D7, I think it's we have the most income restricted at risk in urban renewal, right? Under urban renewal, would that be right?
I'd have to check the data. I don't know if Lisa knows off the top of her head, but I believe that to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the largest number of units, I believe, yes.
Thank you. And so can funds that are collected under urban renewal, right, just thinking here in the future, be used for transitional programs that look into families that are in these protected incomes, in these restricted housing, can those funds be used to transition or some sort of program to transition folks out of this urban renewal situation into home ownership? Or are you doing that currently, and how?
That's a great question. I think one that we should probably really dig into on the technical specifics and in terms of how we might want to achieve it and what restrictions may exist. But certainly today we use our real estate tools to subsidize the creation of affordable homeownership opportunities, and we do that in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Housing, that offers down payment assistance and other programs to help, and classes to help people become homeowners. So there's a whole portfolio of wraparound services that probably extends beyond the topic of urban renewal and can help advance the incredibly important goal of homeownership in our communities.
Okay. Another idea, I guess, or something for us to look into, right? Are the dollars from urban renewal pooled into a general fund, or are they designated to cover expenses for neighborhoods that they're generated in?
I think we'd have to look. We need to work with you on what revenues are derived from urban renewal specifically. We do. I think the only place I can, off the top of my head, I can identify that is a specific pool of money that's tied to urban renewal is land disposition renegotiations. That may be an opportunity to do exactly what you're asking for. In many cases, we have redirected our that funding toward equity and inclusion initiatives. The BPDA's larger real estate portfolio, as is the subject of the hearing today, is in fact tied to urban renewal, because it gives us some of our powers to hold and transfer real estate, and that's sort of like a larger general fund perspective.
I guess that sorry, you're creating more and more questions for me. Do yourself a favor, will you, Devin?
I'll just say yes to the next one.
I wanted to ask you then, do we know the distribution of funds and revenues by project and neighborhood? Do we have that list?
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess not just what we are receiving, but what we are spending as well, right?
That is largely the BPDA's budget is what you're asking for there, I think, and that is publicly available, and we're happy to share that with you.
So you can provide a ledger specifically for funds under urban renewal of expenses by property. Like, you can actually give me that ledger. Now you can give me one specifically to by projects and neighborhood, or
by BPDA owned asset and
Yeah.
lease or revenue. That is data that is available, and any land distribution agreement that has a financial component, that those are one-time payments, but any payments that are associated with that is available. But there isn't a category in our budget called urban renewal.
And there isn't, but you would know, you would be able to do that. You would be able to aggregate that data. You'd be able to say, this percentage that we get from these properties under urban renewal.
No. Urban renewal, it depends on what the details of your question are, but the urban renewal is not a category of ownership.
But there are properties, so you don't have properties that you collect specific funds. I thought, where's the other guy? What's his name?
Sorry. Are you looking for Chief Jemison? And just an FYI, we're at plus 5 minutes now. So if you have one.
Well, that's because I think I fell right into my second round, and I'll nip it in the bud there.
We can come right back to you if you need a second.
I was trying to jazzify and get away with that, but Devin, thank you so much for hanging in there with the questions. I'll specify my questions more I'll articulate them a little bit better, and I will send it to you. And the other thing is, I know that we struggle in the city overall, and we want to diversify our staff. And I just wanted to extend my gratitude to Chief Jemison for your efforts in increasing Black and Brown employees in the BPDA. Devin knows how much this all means to all of us, but specifically how I've emphasized this over and over and over. So I appreciate that and look forward to doing more work, even though we have a few people that quit. We'll miss Dana Whiteside tremendously. I just love him to death, and we wish him all the best. And of course, for anyone else who's left us, but that we continue to work to diversify BPDA and other departments in the city that could use more Black and Brown employees. Thank you so much, Devin. Mr. Chair, thank you so much for indulging me with my time.
Thank you. I just want to check in with Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty, if you want to have that second round, the floor is yours.
Yes, I've been waiting patiently. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Chief and Deputy Chief, just who will appoint the new BPDA board? I assume that will be the mayor, even though currently one of those seats is held by the governor.
Right. So the BPDA board will, nothing's going to change in terms of who appoints members of the BPDA board. Today, we have one vacancy on the BPDA board. We have Brian Miller, who is appointed by the governor, and then we have the remaining board members, Priscilla Rojas, Mike Monahan, and Dr. Ted Landsmark are all appointees, are mayoral appointees, and that's going to stay the same.
Right. Well, obviously, I mean, it's just, again, me just sort of walking through this here. Why even have a board since it's simply going to be a city department and it's no longer going to be an authority? So given that it's no longer a statutory entity, which the BRA is, why would a line department need a board of directors? And as you know, currently you as the chief/director, you need board approval to act, but the new BPDA under what you guys are proposing will actually be a department. And I'm here 20 years. I don't know of another city department that actually has a chief or director that has to report to a board of directors with conferring ministerial authority. So I'm getting into the weeds here, Chief. But this is where this hearing and these conversations are taking me as to if it's going to be a line item department, if the city council is going to oversee that department in terms of the budget and the staff issues or what have you, then I guess it begs the question, why, if that's the case, why would we even need a BPDA board? We have a Boston City Council and a representative government, 9 district, 4 at large, and you frankly would be the only chief/director that would have to respond to a board. So my last part of that is I don't think this dog is gonna hunt up at Beacon Hill. That's my 2 cents on it. This may be another DOA, but yet we're going through this exhaustive exercise of trying to sort of unpack this thing and or answer questions that every time there's an answer, it sort of creates another question. And again, this is giving my tenure and experience and my tenure also up at the BRA. So I guess, yeah, this is a head scratcher for me in terms of what next steps are going to be. If this actually goes through, then I guess the next stage would be, why do we need a BPDA board? And why would you be the only department that would have to actually get approval from the board? Is because it's no longer an authority. There's no other statutory requirement for it.
So we have to have a BPDA board if we're going to continue to approve projects in Boston. We are going to continue to approve projects in Boston. We need to have a BPDA board if we're going to have the right to enter into concessionary tax agreements or buy property. So we're always going to have a BPDA board. It's an essential aspect of what we're doing. And nothing we're proposing here would end having a BPDA board or having a BPDA. The only question is, If you go to like Somerville or go to another place, they've got a board, Somerville Redevelopment Authority, they have a planning board. They all have staff that work for them that work for the city. So that it's like having a special board that can take special kinds of votes. And so I appreciate your question. And I know that there's people out there who are concerned about it. We're going to have a BPDA board, and it's going to keep doing the things that it does because it's the only way we can use those statutory powers. But Lisa looks like she wants to get in. And wait, I'm not saying.
And then
would
you, and then Chief, would you as the chief wield those, very important, precious statutory powers?
I got to ask my board to do anything I want to do. So I get to keep on recommending projects to them and 121As and things like that. But I appreciate your question, Lisa. I want to make sure my general counsel like what I said.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Councilor, just to clarify, there will, at the end of the day, if and when this home rule petition passes, there will continue to be a quasi-governmental agency known legally as the Boston Planning and Development Agency at that time. It will be a single agency rather than the two separate agencies we have now sort of doing business together. The employees may well someday sit as city employees, as the mayor has indicated she wants us to do, but the agency will exist. And so we'll send the board.
And if that's the case, Council, then in order for me to feel comfortable with this, then that means the chief needs to serve under the BPDA, not under the city. And that's a clear distinction. So if we're going to have BPDA, BRA doing business as BPDA statutory powers, then I would argue that the chief of the department, the top dog of the department, should have, one, the ability to wield those powers, clearly with board approval, but that she, in this instance, he sits as an employee of the BPDA, not an employee of the city of Boston. So that would mean that we have these powers, but that he technically can't wield them because statutorily he's arguably exempt because he's a city employee. That would mean that the deputy chief in this instance, as an employee of the BPDA, would be able to wield the powers. I think it's a little backwards, and I would be emphasizing that Chief Jameson needs to be an employee of the BPDA if those powers are to exist, if we're to be recognizing those powers, and if we're going to be implementing those powers in any particular situation across the city of Boston. The buck is going to be stopping with him as the chief. We can't have a situation where he's technically a city employee and we have to reach across the desk, if you will, to another employee who's technically a BPDA employee. You follow where I'm going with this? I'm trying to peel back this onion, and it doesn't make any sense to me. But if what you're telling me is true, then Chief Jameson needs to be an employee of the BPDA. We can't have it every different way. So we're either going to have these powers and we're going to have a BPDA board, and Chief Jameson's going to report to the BPDA board statutorily. Well, then he better have the ability as the chief under the guise of the BPDA to be able to wield these powers. It shouldn't be a situation where he's kind of like off to the side, and then he's got to go to the board, and then when he actually needs to go to these powers, he's got to go to a BPDA employee. This is backwards for me. That has to be straightened out. Chief Jameson needs to be an employee of the BPDA. If we're going to continue to have a BPDA board, if he's going to continue to have to report to the BPDA, and we're going to use and wield BPDA statutory powers, how does that not make sense to folks on this Zoom? What am I missing here? So Chief Jameson has to ask permission from a BPDA employee to employ BPDA statutory powers? That makes zero sense to me. In a chain of command that is upside down.
So can we just call the administration to answer back to that? Thank you.
Appreciate the question. I think what might be the right thing to do, because there is a very fast answer, but I think there was a moment where General Counsel Cedarbaum for the city had to submit a series of detailed analyses making the argument about why this made sense. It seems like, given the hour and the fact I think there are still hands, what I'd love to do is maybe get some of that material over to you, Council Flaherty. I mean, in many ways, I appreciate your question. I think if we could make sure that the broader audience has an understanding of it. But I'll get that material to you, and then we can sort of maybe even start the working session with a deep dive into that.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
And I appreciate that, Chief. And then one of my initial questions, and I think the deputy tried to answer, was in terms of the rents and the leases and what have you. And are there any plans right now to dispose of any property? You guys may remember at one point, former Mayor Menino was talking about selling off the Marine Industrial Park, which at the time folks were heralding as an out-of-the-box idea. It was a bad idea then, and recognizing now it would be an even worse idea given the actual jewel, the gem that we have called the Ray Flynn Marine Industrial Park, the number of employees, the businesses that are down there. And you talk about a diversity of businesses in terms of cold storage, freight forwarding, bulk container, breweries, life science, you name it, design, architecture. It's an asset to our city that we almost sold off. But so I guess the question is, are there any plans right now to sell off any of our assets?
There's no plans at this time to sell off any of those assets.
Okay.
And so I appreciate the question. I think next year, there's going to be probably a talk about revenues, but not, we've had no discussions about selling any assets.
Right. Thank you, Chief. And then just lastly, the stakeholders and folks, in terms of the development community, the investment community, the folks that go through Article 80 process regularly, they're not here. And frankly, they need to be heard, as do other stakeholders and community residents. So in lieu of maybe just going to a working session, I would suggest, through the chair, that we consider an in-person hearing so that stakeholders, folks that have real life experience, if we want best practices, we need to invite those folks to have a seat at the table. One of my colleagues often uses the expression, something about us without us is not for us. Well, in the development community, the Article 80 process in particular, with developers and investors and lawyers and architects and ground game folks, in addition to community leaders and stakeholders, they really need to have an opportunity to be heard. So the mayor, obviously, in the state of the city, talked about the stated objective here is to do more planning and to avoid doing things by piecemeal. But as we're unpacking this, it seems like we are doing it piecemeal. And prior to another working session, we really should, sit down with those that have gone through and continue to go through this process and have been going through it for years, and lean on a little bit of their experience as to how do we make this process more streamlined? How do we do this and get this? How do we do it better? Just seems like it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. So that said, obviously open to again continue dialogue. And Chief, I would really actually like if we're going to have a BPDA and a BPDA board, I cannot insist and implore enough that you, as the chief, where the buck is going to be stopping with you, you need to be the head of that organization. Any other sort of chain of command or pie chart or whatever, it would be upside down if you're not in that position as the head of the BPDA, wielding BPDA powers, being responsible to a BPDA board. To do that as a city employee does not make sense to me. All right, so I'll leave it at that. I appreciate you, Chief and Deputy Chief and Council, and that's what I'll be looking to see in terms of if this is to move forward. Some of those recommended changes.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Do we have anyone, before I do my part, do we have anybody who would like their second round to, I see Kenzie and I see Flynn. I'm going to go by order of arrival on the second round. So Kenzie followed by Flynn. So Councilor Bachman.
Great, thanks so much, Councilor Arroyo. And I'll be brief with this because since we're going to the working session, I did want to ask, because I know that the team said that they were going to follow up on the NIOP comments, but specifically this issue of the new BPDA being a public instrumentality of the city, but not being bound by the charter restrictions on like the making of contracts and stuff. Lisa, is there anything to say on that yet? Or it can wait till Friday if there's not, but just.
No, thank you, Councilor. No, other than it is certainly our intention that we are not bound by the city charter. So I will run that down, but I don't believe that was the intent or indeed effect of that language, but we'll make sure that that's the case.
Yeah, because it would seem obvious to me. I mean, again, the whole reason that the like agency needs to continue to exist as an entity, I addressed this up at the beginning, is the fact that there are types of things that a municipal city corporation can't do by state law. It's really important to us that you guys be able to do them on our behalf, frankly. And to that point, I don't have quite the same issue that Councilor Flaherty does about where the chief's salary is paid from, just because I think that the board as a governance structure can deputize people to be instrumentalities of it. And so I actually feel like as long as the board entity is separate, I mean, it would obviously it would not make sense to have some person employed by the BPDA as an entity that was then like stamping things because the director couldn't, but I don't think that would be the situation. I think it's more like the board would empower this person who happens to be a city employee to do things the same way that we can all empower people, you know, with various legal documents, we empower various people to do things all the time without them necessarily being on our payroll. So I think that I have less of an issue with than my colleague, but I do think it's incredibly important that this document establish very clearly that the BPDA persists as an agent, as an entity that is not bound by the restrictions of the city charter. So if we need to literally write that in that says, in no way shall this be interpreted to mean that, you know, it's bound by the city charter, I think that's really important. So I just wanted to flag that as a particular thing. And otherwise, I think just again, repeat myself on just if you guys can come prepared to the Friday working session to just speak to the NIOP points point by point. And then of course, my suggestion around the preamble.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are having, again, that working session on Friday. So if you have those kinds of language-based edits or somebody sends you a letter like we have here and there's something that you would like to bring to that working session from any other involved stakeholder, then please feel free to do so at that planning session. Councilor Flynn, and then I did see Councilor Flaherty's hand raised. I don't know if you were looking for a third round. Councilor Flaherty, really quickly before Councilor, just so I understand.
Yeah, no, it's just going to be in response to my colleague in term. The analogy I was going to make would be like our fire commissioner trying to get approval from the state fire marshal, but has to go through an individual firefighter to get permission from local 718, the local union, in order to carry something out. So trying to put it into layman and laywomen's terms as to what the chief would need to do in order to exercise statutory powers. It would just be kind of upside down in the chain of command.
And Councilor Flaherty, I'm just disagreeing with the analogy. I just don't think that we would need to set up a workaround like that. But I'm sure we can discuss this at further length in the working session.
Yeah, then we can hash all that out on Friday. Councilor Flynn, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to stress, and I know I've worked with Devin on this issue, but the Port of Boston is very important to the economy of New England. I know, Arthur, you obviously know that, and Devin and Lisa and the PPDA team does as well. But that's a critical industry in Boston. One industry in particular, Devin, that we've talked about is the fish processing, plays a critical role. But if you're willing to work hard, you might have a high school degree, you might not. But if you're willing to work hard, you can make a good living there. And well, I'm concerned that some of the missteps we're making, Devin, and it's really not BPDA, but I'm concerned about some of the missteps we've made as a city in terms of transportation support for our business community, especially in the fish processing area. We're hurting these businesses down in and around the Raceland Marine Industrial Park. So again, just want to stress to you how important that is to the economy of New England, the Port of Boston. We have a lot of tourists coming in as well, a lot of cruises that take place. Sometimes military ships come in. So that's one issue. If you can respond again. But my second point is potentially moving BPDA team over to City of Boston employees. Have we talked to them? Have we talked extensively to BPDA team employees about the changes that are coming and the impact this will have on their retirement?
So, Councilor, maybe I'll take the first, and Arthur, you want to take the second part? Councilor, I just want to start by thanking you for being such an incredible leader for the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Park and on behalf of the tenants we have there, many of whom are maritime and industrial-based businesses. You, Councilor Flaherty, and many others have been great champions for those industries and great partners. So I just want to say thank you for that. I think your question is probably a little bit outside the scope of the home rule petition today. And so I maybe just want to reiterate that nothing we're proposing today is meant to cause any harm to that industry. In fact, we want to continue to embrace it, build it, grow it, incubate it. And I think Councilor Flaherty appropriately called it a crown jewel of Boston. And that's something that we're really proud that over many decades we've built together. And of course, we're very eager to engage on the transportation issues. But foundationally, as the home rule petition today, we have, when passed, we have no intent other than to continue to embrace the mission of the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Park.
Thank you, Devin. That's certainly important to the residents of Boston. It's important to me. So thank you for that commitment. And I know you kind of highlighted, Devin, maybe the chief might take the second part of that question, right, as it relates to kind of, have we engaged the BPDA employees about potential changes, and how does it impact them? Because I want to make sure that we're being fair to them, that what retirement system they go into. I know those are technical questions, but I want to make sure that we do everything we can for the BPDA team, because they've worked hard over the years and deserve fairness. And I know you're a fair person, Chief, so I just want to follow up on that.
No, I appreciate the chance to answer it. So this is I think you've said it correctly, and I know other councilors on this call have said the same thing, Council President, that the staff are the reason that the successes that we have, they're the reasons that we have them. And I have, with Devin and our HR director and others, had a whole series of meetings about the impacts on staff. We've and everything from small groups with in section by section with the different groups, for example, the real estate group or planning, and we've also had broad meetings with the entire staff, both on Zoom and in person. And what we've heard from folks is listen, we're looking for the commitment, or for you to underline the commitment you've already made that says we're going to get the same salary, or we're going to be able to get the same benefits or choices that are in fact better. What I think we're learning from talking to them is that sometimes it's really more about the consistency of the benefits, but we're in lots of small details that are important to us, and that's one of the reasons why we've said, listen, we need to give this transition the time it needs to be successful and to be effective, so that we can make good on the commitments we've made. And just to highlight a specific topic you've mentioned, there are people who've been working side by side in this agency as BRA and EDIC staff who have different retirement systems, and I think the chance to address that thoughtfully is something that we're really wanted to make time for, so that people who've been here a long time, maybe under EDIC, will have more choices. If a transition happens, I know this is an issue many staff have brought to my attention. So we're taking the time to talk to staff because, again, they're the most important natural resource we have is the talent here, both the talent that's been here and pave the way, and also the new talent that we're recruiting, representing the full range of people. So I want to be clear, we're going to keep doing that, Council President, because if we're going to have a good transition, it depends on us doing that. So we're committed to continuing that, the 5 or 6 direct specific meetings we've had about it into the future, long before there's a budget submittal in 2024.
Well, thank you, Chief. And let me just say in closing, since I started 6 years ago on the council, I have the utmost respect for the BPDA, EDIC employees. I have seen their professionalism over this period of time. Maybe I didn't have that same professionalism or that same understanding, I should say, for them until I actually saw what they do every day, working on the ninth floor or at the Flynn Marine Park area. But having seen them over the last 6 years, I have a great respect for the work they do and the professionalism they perform for our residents every day. So I'm going to stop there and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. And then before I just do my first round, I want to make sure I got everybody else's second rounds done. Looks like I do. And so just a quick, I think, God bless you if you've stood on this for 2 hours and you're following along with this and it's made perfect sense to you. I really appreciate our residents of the city who were able to follow this logically. But I just want to bring this home. And so for me, I think there were a lot of conversations about conversations that aren't really actually before us right this second, but things that may in the future come before us if this makes it all the way through the process of a home rule petition, through us, through the legislature, through the governor, his signature. And so just to be clear, and I think maybe Devin, you might be the best person to answer it, but if the chief or anybody else would like to answer this question, specifically short elevator pitch version, because I don't want folks confused by what this actually does. What does this actually do? It doesn't change the status of the employees in the BPDA, correct? It doesn't change where and who pays them, doesn't change who they answer to. Can you just give me like the cliff notes on what the document that we are actually voting on and that we are actually looking at does, and then maybe some of the things that it doesn't do?
You called the right person, Councilor Devin's the right person.
So happy to do that. I'm happy to also point folks to the PowerPoint because we did try to do that in that document. But I think the upshot is, first and foremost, this is about urban renewal and the future of urban renewal in our city, sunsetting that, ending that era of Boston's history, but doing so in a way that protects the important community items of value that the urban renewal currently protects, and allows us to transition some of the real estate tools that we might want to use in the future to new purposes: affordability, equity, and resilience. Since we've opened up the urban renewal statute, we're also trying to clean up the BPDA's or the BRA's and EDIC's charter and mission, and consolidate those two separate organizations into one single organization. That's it. What it doesn't do, it doesn't move staff to the city. It doesn't change the development process. But we'll still have a BPDA board. That BPDA board will still approve development projects through the Article 80 process. There are other fine details in the home rule petition, but that's really it. That is I would say the Cliff Notes version of what we're trying to accomplish today.
Thank you. That sums it up pretty cleanly. So basically, in common layman terms, what you're saying is we're cleaning up or modernizing sort of the statutory language around blight and all of those things to take into account new environmental analysis and focuses, equity analysis and focuses, and we're consolidating the EDIC into one thing. And that's what this document that we are voting on and talking about does. I think part of what my council colleagues are aware of is that there's likely a future plan to change the way the BPDA works in ways that may bring it into the city's fold. But this doesn't actually do that. That's not what this document does. And so I just want that clear to the public, to anybody who's watching this, to my council colleagues, what's before us, because I think there's a mixture of a bunch of different things that people know is in the air, have been discussed over the course of years. But this document does not do that. I guess the other question I have, which I think might be better answered by the chief, but Devin, you might also have the answer to this. In what ways does this strengthen the BPDA's mission and work? In what ways does this give you tools, if any? So in other words, is this simply sort of an updating or a refreshing of statutory language to reflect the modern period and what we're trying to do in the city? Or does this in some way give you tools that you don't currently have available to you at the BPDA to do the mission of the BPDA? And if so, in what ways does it do that? If you could just highlight what this adds to the BPDA and the ability for the BPDA to do that work, if anything, or is it simply just a refresh and a modernization?
Devin has done a good job with this. I'll let him come back in if he wants to. It's a refresh and a modernization of the urban renewal aspect. Specifically, today, if I want to help a project, incentivize a project to have more affordability, I have to spend it's a hard time jamming it into the existing findings that I have to make related to decadence, whatever that is, a blight, and substandard housing. Now I'll be able to say this developer is providing even more affordability than is required. I have the ability to use our powers to help them. Same thing for resilience. If I want to protect a part of the Neponset, a part of the one of the other parts of the city that's sort of at risk of flooding, I have a chance. I can use those powers to acquire land to protect it with a nature-based solution, for example. That's something that I can't do today that I would be able to do later. So that's hopefully answering your question directly.
That answers that question great, actually. In terms of sort of the things, just because I think people are worried about, I've heard it brought up the idea of changes piecemeal or things like that. I think one of the things that I actually like about this is that we're taking these things in steps. We're not just reshaping everything at once. I think it's really appropriate to do that with something as integral to the city as its development. I think every counselor on here is very aware that 70-something% of our city budget comes from property tax. And so as goes development, goes the city of Boston, frankly, and as goes our property, goes the city of Boston. And so that's for folks that are sort of listening and aren't aware of that fact. Other cities like New York, property taxes may be 20 to 17% of their total budget. That's not true for Boston. It's well over 50%. It's about 70%. And so I think I echo their concerns about making sure we do that in a way that is sufficiently thought out and planned out. And I think this gives us an on-ramp. But to be clear about what that is, when you change and modernize and refresh this, there would then have to be a future ordinance or home rule petition or something of that kind that reshapes it to change the status of employees and to do all of that. Is that accurate?
So it would not, in fact, be, actually, pardon me, there would be an ordinance. I mean, this is my understanding currently, and I would not officially submitting this as an exhibit for consideration. But first, there need to be an ordinance creating a department, and then there would need to be a budget submittal, which would create positions and fund them as part of the operating budget of the city. That's something that's going to take a lot of time to make sure it's done properly, and so that's why we're talking about that being an action of the next fiscal year, not the one that we're budgeting for now. It will be actually an act of the fiscal year following, and we prep for it this time next year. So it would be an ordinance creating a department and a budget supporting that department. Many of the questions people have asked, like where will the money come from? Where will how will we resource that department? Those are very valid questions, and they belong in the discussion about the other two, the ordinance and the budget of next year.
Okay, so because I also agree those are very valid questions. So essentially, just so that everybody's clear as they watch this, what we're doing is changing, sort of modernizing the language, sort of eliminating the old urban renewal language, which focuses on blight, giving you new tools around environmental protections and equity-based protections. And then in the future, because I'm aware of this fact as a counselor, the council has to create sort of this office So it would go through some ordinance format. So in the future, we would be having possibly as early as the beginning of next year, or there's about some conversation about budget and changing of how that might work and how that will work. Is that an accurate timeline to some degree? All right, fantastic. And so the reason I say that is I just want to be clear again on the document before us. In what way, if any, does this change a developer's process? So not what they have to deliver in terms of the environmental protections and things of that nature, but how does it change the process from them getting their project in the door to the end? Does it make any change whatsoever to the developer's process?
The home rule petition before you does not. Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong.
So basically, Lisa, if you can just chime in on that, just if we pass this, if this goes up and they pass this makes no change to what a developer's process is going through the process to have a project in the city of Boston?
Correct.
Okay, so it doesn't impact developers in that way. The changes we're talking about in the future, possibly coming down the pipeline, those could, but this document before us doesn't. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and maybe to expound upon that, it also provides clarity on what the future of urban renewal is. So to the extent that you are a developer developing on an urban renewal property or anything that's connected to that, it gives you more clarity and more predictability.
And gives you a sense of where we're headed.
Yes.
Yes, and if I understand your question, Chairman, to the extent there are other changes proposed to Article 80, that will have its own process.
Yeah, but that has its own process, right?
Yeah, that'll have its own process.
I believe the Article 80 has the task force right now that's going about trying to rework what the Article 80 process is, but that's not this. That's a separate thing. It's not even, that's, I think, still in task force phase right now. And so I just wanted to make sure from the standpoint of developers going through the process when they're submitting a project proposal and they're doing all of that, nothing that's currently in the pipeline, nothing that somebody has at home on a desk or in their office on a desk that they're about to file, this makes no difference to that process for them. All right.
That's correct.
Likely explains why I haven't received too many calls from them on this particular piece of this. And so I guess I get a sense of the strengths. I really appreciate knowing the environmental sort of agency that it gives you that it has not in the past. And so is there anything other than that specific carve out in terms of those things that it does that are worth highlighting? Because I actually consider that a significant power. I mean, the project you brought up, Devin, in Rosendale, that was on Walter Street. That was actually in my district. And that was a long-standing, I think it's now owned by Habitat for Humanities or Habitat for
That's
Humanities.
right.
The project on it. I consider that a success story. But I think those kinds of protections are integral to our ability to do work. I know it comes up more and more, and as we talk about sort of the waterfront, and we talk about, I think it was in the Globe today or yesterday about, close to $1 billion idea for protecting property in the waterfront. In what ways would this help facilitate those kinds of concerns? Because I know, and this is separate and apart, but on this point, I know that when Hurricane Sandy happened in New Jersey, that was like a first time sort of situation in that regard. I know that we've had multiple sort of concerning reports from different folks about where the waterfront and sort of our downtown area, due to the fact that we are sort of on water landfill, and there's a lot of sort of coastal concerns. Would this empower the city in a way that we currently aren't empowered to do sort of defensive work like what is being proposed there with the bridge and the valves and all of that? Is that something that gives us sort of agency to work in that process?
Yes, absolutely. One of the fundamental goals here is to create new real estate powers centered around resiliency. Today, if we wanted to take those actions that you're describing, we either can't because they aren't within the city or BPDA's powers. We have to find a way to align it against blight, decadence, and substandard housing if that opportunity existed. Or we use some of the city's tools that are much more limited, that would require a competitive bid process or things that are just not the way that the real estate market actually works. We need to be able to go out there and negotiate an easement, negotiate a public-private partnership, negotiate an acquisition in order to actually realize these benefits in the short term. and Boston is an existential threat from flooding. So that is why we're asking to retain and reposition that tool.
And I think we've gotten incredibly lucky, frankly, just as a side note, that we haven't had worse. I think there was a hurricane concern maybe a year or two ago that we got lucky with a change in sort of the pattern that people were incredibly afraid of. These are plans that we shouldn't, like, these things are like a decade away from being implemented, and frankly, they should have already been under construction. And so I do have a lot of concern about sort of environmentally where and how exposed we are. I think that entire process, that plan for that sort of safety valve talks about saving billions in dollars of downtown sort of property value and protections. And I think that fact is we're way behind on a lot of that stuff. And so this to me is a helpful measure to get there. I guess one final question that I have, just for clarity's sake, I think you did a good job sort of explaining it in the moment, because it came up in multiple questions, is the act itself modernizes the language, but the reason for the board, the reason why we still have a board is that the statutory, so even though it modernizes and sort of cleans up urban renewal language, that statute that we're basing this off still requires a board to exercise the powers of that statute. Is that accurate? And so that's why we, in our process, so back to the conversation about developers and when they submit a project and it goes through, the BPDA board is the one who makes a final judgment on those projects, right? So the board itself is what sustains the process sort of working the same way for folks, and it's also required statutorily. That's exactly right. All right, and so, and it is correct that the board is required statutorily, right? It's not a choice, it's required by how the statute's written.
Chapter 121B and 121C for the BRA and EDIC respectively, yes.
Okay, and then I think there was a valid question in there by Councilor Flaherty about selection of that board. Does this change, and I might have missed your answer on that, does this change the makeup of that board? In other words, if there's a governor's seat there, does it change any of that?
No, it does not change it at all. And again, it carries forward the existing terms of the existing board members. So it stays, so the way that the board is selected remains the same? Exactly.
Yep.
Okay. Man, it's getting to 5:15, so I was trying to figure out, based on what I have here, how we got this far down the line. But it sounds like, for the most part, the substantial things that you do have in mind at some point, they're before us. They're not before us today. They're before us in time. Eventually, we are going to have some very meaty, substantial proposals before us that we're going to have to sort of work through. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay, but that's why, for me, just for my council colleagues, when it came to a working session or not a working session on this particular piece of this felt very, very much like a non-controversial stance. I think based on just the feedback from my colleagues that you would like a working session, we will have one on Friday. But I rest assured that as chair, all of those larger issues that folks brought up, the hiring and how we're going to handle all the staffing and all those things that aren't before us right now, but will be before us in the future, I agree that those things should have a well thought out process that would certainly be longer than this process for this. I see Councilor Flaherty has his hand up. I'm going to go to him.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to belabor the point, but just in response to that, one of the reasons, obviously, that obviously the hearing is, I guess, taken on and gone down these different roads is largely because it's a preamble, potentially for development to be thrown into a bureaucratic morass. And we all know that development in the city, it's too important for the tax base, for all the programs and plans and line items that we see in our budget for the city's operating to sort of take for granted. It's too important for jobs, both permanent construction. It's too important for housing creation. So, being protective of either a head fake or, in the legal terms, a red herring. That's why I think that there's a lot of concerns. And as both the chief and deputy chief and council were answering questions, they were creating more questions of my colleagues. So I think it's very prudent of us to be very cautious moving forward, so that we don't. Arguably, if we don't ask these questions, it's going to be a nightmare for both the chief and the deputy chief. The way it's structured now, and development, you go through the process, and then there's going to be like an advisory panel. There's going to be like 4 more sign-offs needed. Just creating, again, another level and layer of sort of bureaucratic morass that developers and investors and communities don't need, you know?
Counselor, just for the record, this does need 4 more sign-offs. It needs if we sign off on it, it needs the mayor, the state house, the state senate.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about when, in moving forward, when developers have implemented, you know, there's the advisory council or the advisory committee that's going to meet. So my point is that the angst and the anxiety in the questions that we're asking during the course of this hearing and why it's taken so long is just for that simple reason. It's too important of an issue. And it's also concerns around, you know, the process and the tax base and things that we're going to be seeing down the road. So it's, one could be saying, hey, it's just this, but it's bigger than that. It's the BRA, and arguably we're dismantling the BRA, you know, over one Zoom. And I've got concerns on it, as do many of our colleagues who ask very important questions. So I appreciate your patience as the chair. I know it's gone on a little bit longer than probably anyone expected, but it's that important, and we should be asking these questions, and we should be holding the BRA doing business at the BPDA's feet to the fire as to what the process is moving forward, because the last thing we want to do is throw it into disarray.
Yeah, and I would just say I agree that, you know, our development ecosystem is incredibly important to the city. Obviously, you know, we talked about the tax base, but also the jobs and the things that brings, and the fact that we are in a housing crisis and continuing to have development is a very vital tool of addressing that housing crisis if done correctly. What I just want to make sure folks stay focused on is the reality that many of these concerns are 100% valid, but they're valid on issues that aren't before us today. And so I don't want folks being confused or conflating what might be coming down the line with what's before us right now, because I think what's before us right now is much more restrained and much more specific than sort of these open-ended questions that folks, like, with all due respect to Mr. Quirk and Chief Jemison, they don't have answers to things that aren't before us because they're not before us. And I assume that the day that they put those things before us, they will have a structured plan and a structured talking points and a firm understanding of exactly what the budget is and what the staffing decisions are and what those things are. But I also am very aware that I'm not asking them to have that today, because that's not what's before me today. And so I just want to make sure folks stay focused on what's actually before us today and don't get ahead of ourselves a little bit on what's coming down the pike. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be very brief. I just want to highlight and say thank you also to the chief, to the deputy chief, and to the legal counsel for their attendance and professionalism. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues as well. They asked a lot of questions. They had concerns, and that's where exactly we ask these tough questions, is at these meetings. So our colleagues came prepared with questions, but that's exactly the role of the city council, is asking questions, getting answers, but doing the best they can for their constituents. So just want to say thank you to my colleagues as well for taking these issues very seriously, because what happens in the development community, what happens to the economy of Boston, is going to impact services to the residents of Boston. A lot of the money that we spend on schools, on trash removal and pickup, and services for our seniors and people with disabilities, it comes from the development community, from the developers that put these buildings up. So let's also factor that in when we make these important decisions and ask these difficult questions. So again, thank you, Mr. Chair, for this professional meeting today.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I also want to just take a moment to thank my council colleagues. We had 12 of 13 councilors here today for this hearing. And I believe the one that isn't is on maternity. Councilor Braden, I see you are here, and I haven't given you a chance to actually ask questions. Do you have any questions? You can unmute. The floor is yours. Councilor Braden.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been listening in all the time. I haven't, I had an appointment. I wasn't able to participate in the conversation, but I really want to thank everyone for their incredible presentation, and the back and forth conversation this afternoon has clarified some issues, and I look forward to the working session on Friday. Thank you.
And we'll see you there. And I just want to, so with that in mind, I just want to thank my colleagues for your attention to this. I think the passion that you have for the city of Boston and for making sure that we're making smart and informed decisions was on display today. I also want to thank Chief Jemison, Lisa Harrington, and Devin Quirk for your patience and your professionalism in answering questions to the best of your capabilities. I want to offer you, before we sign off, I also see that I still have some colleagues on. Before I give you guys the chance for the final word on this, before we adjourn, I just want to ask if any other colleague has anything they'd like to say before we, fantastic. So with that, Chief Jemison, Lisa, Devin, if you have any final closing sort of remarks you want to make before we adjourn, the floor is yours, and then we'll probably see somebody here, I'm assuming Devin, and perhaps Lisa on Friday's Zoom.
I would say I would want to echo Council and Chair the comments of the folks. Thank you very much for the time today. Understanding what we're doing is crucial to making informed votes, and for the broader listening public, I would just want to reiterate that this is about reforming the aspect of our work related to our special powers that are granted to the redevelopment authority component of our the agency doing business as BPDA. Devin had a great summary of what this is and isn't that I'd like him to do very briefly, but you said it, summed it up very well, Councilor Arroyo, that this is about changing aspects of our enabling statute. There are future discussions at a future time in the form of future ordinances and budget that really address the major questions that members of the council have added. And this is a much narrower discussion today. Devin, do you mind saying again what those things that we're doing today and that we're not doing today?
Yeah, just very quickly, it's about the future of urban renewal. This act technically abolishes and technically sunsets urban renewal, and does so in a way that allows us to hold on to the community items of value, those community use restrictions that we need to protect affordable housing, open space, community uses, et cetera. Also allows us to retain some of our real estate tools and powers for future uses, but under a new charter: affordability, equity, and resilience, rather than blight, decadence, and substandard housing. So if we wanted to take actions in the future, we'd have to prove a nexus to affordability, equity, and resilience. Those are the major urban renewal actions. We also are, as we're opening up the urban renewal statute, since that is so intimately tied to the BRA, we are also modernizing the BRA's BPDA's charter to become urban, focused on resilience, equity, and affordability. And we are taking the BRA, EDIC, and consolidating them into one organization so that it's easier to manage. What we are not doing, we're not moving staff to the city. We're not causing any new expenditures or incurring any new costs for the city. It's a budget neutral proposal. We are not changing the way that development happens in the city of Boston. Development will continue to go through the BPDA board. The BPDA board remains the same, and the same structure, the same appointment structure, and that the Article 80 process going through the BPDA board will continue to be the process by which development happens. Those are things that are all embedded in state law. So if we wanted to change how the development review process happened in Boston, that would actually require a second home rule petition, and that is not what we're proposing today.
Thank you for that summation. And then with the final act of this meeting / hearing, I'm going to go to, if we can promote Lori Radwin to panelist so she can give her public comment. As far as I understand it, she's the only person who signed up for public comment, though I see another hand, H4A, with a hand up. If you would like to make public comment, please email ccc.go@boston.gov your name, and we'll then bring you in.
Hi.
Lori, the floor is yours.
Hi, Counselor. So it feels a little anticlimactic, but we did round back to those three concepts of equity, resilience, and affordability. And I'm really reminded of ethical dilemmas in healthcare because there are competing claims when you try to make all of those equal in any given decision. And I can think of Southwest Boston. You know, some of the things that we've done in Southwest Boston for resilience have actually ended up hurting small business owners in the area. So we lost equity in favor of resilience. And when middle class affordable housing is promoted, again, there's an equity charge to that because it raises the rents and the tax base for people who have been living in the area to begin with, and you're looking at displacement. So I thematically, there's just something beautiful about hoping for that triangle. But I don't think you can legislate judgment. But I think as each decision is made, what's the cost, and how do you mitigate that cost so that you don't make a less equal system or a less resilient system? And thank you, Councillor, for allowing me to have the time to say that. It's a more broad-reaching remark that I think will carry through to decisions that are made subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you for waiting out your chance to speak. Thank you so much. I believe that's it for community comment. So at this time, I'm going to adjourn this hearing. We have a working session on Friday at 10 a.m. And so I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you, everybody.